Good evening and welcome. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, good evening once again and welcome. Tonight's meeting is being broadcast by Boston City TV, live on YouTube, as well as Comcast Channel 24, RCN Channel 13, and FiOS Channel 1962. It will be rebroadcast at a later date. We have interpretation services available this evening in Spanish. Will the Spanish interpreter, if he has arrived, please raise his hand and introduce himself? Okay, I think Juan's on his en route right now, but if anyone needs interpretive services, you can see Ms. Parvex in the hallway outside, and she will get you signed up. If you would also like to sign up for public comment, you can see Ms. Parvex in the hallway. Sign up for both public comment periods will close this evening at 6:30 p.m. Move on now to the approval of minutes for the November 6th school committee meeting, as well as the November 13th school committee retreat. If the minutes are approved as presented, hard copies will be made available immediately in the hallway with the other handouts. If any changes are made, you can access the minutes tomorrow on the BPS website. So at this time, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the November 6th, 2019 meeting and November 20th, today is November 20th, November 13th, 2019 retreat as presented. Is there a motion? Thank you, Dr. Coleman. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Any objection to approving the minutes by unanimous consent? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. We'll move on now to the superintendent's report. I present to you our superintendent, Dr. Brenda Caecilius.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for joining us this evening. I'd like to share some highlights from around the district and discuss a few upcoming calendar items so that we're moving into that season with lots of activities happening within our schools, and I wanted to bring some of those to your attention. Just a few weeks ago, we had students travel to Columbia. Later this evening, members will vote on revised field trip policy, so I thought it would be nice to share some photos from a recent field trip. This one is to South America. 30 students from the Josiah Quincy Upper School traveled to Medellin, Colombia from October 20th to October 26th as part of our school's International Baccalaureate program. As part of that program, they often do field studies and service projects. The purpose of the trip was to engage IB learners in hands-on practical challenges to tackle the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals in an international setting. These are wonderful opportunities for our students. Many thanks to our teachers and school leaders for their work putting these opportunities together, and of course our Director of Global Education, Kayla Dorsey Chumesi. I want to make sure some important dates are on your radar, as well as our community's radar as we get ready for the season. Tomorrow, the BPS Office of Special Education and Boston Special Education Parent Advisory Council, SPEDPAC, will host the Special Needs Resource Fair at Leahy Halloran Community Center, still learning these words, next to the Murphy K-8 school in Dorchester from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. We have over 30 partners participating, including multiple BPS departments, the Boys and Girls Club of Boston, Goodwill, Easter Seals, and many more. So thank you to our partners, and this is a great opportunity for our families of BPS students with disabilities to learn more about community resources that are available to them. School registration season is upon us. It's going to begin in January. We're providing both current and prospective BPS families with several events to learn more about our wonderful BPS school registration process in our schools. We're hosting several registration info sessions at various locations across the city. In addition, all our schools are hosting school preview times or opportunities for families to visit schools, meet with staff, and get a feel for the community and programs available. The annual BPS Showcase of Schools is Saturday, December 14th at Boston Latin Academy. All of our schools will have booths open with school staff representatives on hand to answer questions that families may have and our students may have. Many central office departments will also be present, and transportation to the showcase will be available for our families. And of course, families can always visit our 4 welcome centers in Dorchester, East Boston, Roslindale, and Roxbury, and also here with our welcome center here, right here in Bowling. In addition, there are 4 temporary welcome center locations open to select Thursdays throughout the school year in Alston, Brighton, Dorchester, and Mattapan. Much more detailed information is available on our website at bostonpublicsschools.org/register. Wanted to give you all another update on my community tour. This has been by far the busiest week for me. There are only a couple weeks left in the tour, this week and next, but by Thanksgiving I will have visited almost all of our schools, save for just a few. Earlier today, I was at the Tynan Elementary in South Boston and had the pleasure of seeing Miss A's K2 classroom. I have to say, it was the most joyful classroom that I have been in Boston Public Schools. It is amazing, and every teacher should see it. I can't, they had bunnies, and they had fish. They had student work on the wall. It was evident that that she was using data and children get engaged, and it was absolutely amazing, and so much, I was so moved. I mean, literally almost moved to tears how beautiful this classroom was. As I mentioned last week during the retreat, I'll share the first draft of the strategic plan on December 11th, followed by a month-long public comment period. The final versions of the strategic plan will be published on February 1st, and we'll have a full opportunity for community input from the final draft all the way through to the draft that I ask for you to pass sometime in February. We still have a few more community meetings coming up for those who haven't had an opportunity to give feedback to inform the strategic vision for the district. Tomorrow we'll host a meeting in Roxbury community and nearby schools, Dearborn STEM Academy right up the street. This coming Monday, November 25th, we'll have a community meeting for Jamaica Plain, Roslindale, and West Roxbury at the English High School. And finally, our last town hall style neighborhood meeting will be in Dorchester at the Henderson Upper School on Tuesday, December 3rd. All community members are welcome at all of our meetings, regardless of location. If you haven't been out to a meeting yet, please, please, please consider joining us. You can view a calendar of the meetings and school visits and share your feedback with us at bostonpublicsschools.org/community tour. Well, as everyone knows, Thanksgiving is next week. We're all looking forward to that. I'll be visiting my children in Minnesota. Notice how I didn't say I'm going home, because Boston is now my home. Many of our student athletes will also be on the field for Thanksgiving, so I wanted to give you those dates. So East Boston takes on Excel Burke at White Stadium at 9:30 a.m. BLA versus O'Brien at Madison Park Stadium at 10 a.m. Brighton High versus Chelsea High at Chelsea High Stadium at 10 a.m. And the nation's oldest continuous high school football rivalry, dated to 1887, continues. BLS versus English at Harvard Stadium at 10 a.m. So come on out and support our student athletes as they take the field on Thanksgiving morning. And now that we're in the holiday season, many of our schools will be hosting events and showcasing the incredible talents of our students. Please consider joining us at those celebrations as well, and you can look to our calendar for events then. So that's my update.
Well, thank you very much, Superintendent. And before I turn it over to members for questions and comment, I want to note that I'll be joining you on Monday. I think I neglected to mention that earlier, but you're visiting my children's schools, the Beethoven and the Orenberger, on Monday afternoon, so I'll look forward to joining you there.
Great. And Monica just gave me the update after today, and it is 120 school visits and 92 meetings.
It's amazing that you actually get any work done.
I have a great team.
I'll open it up now to members for questions and discussion. Ms. Robinson.
I just want to say that I've attended a number of the evening community meetings.
Thank you.
They're quite sobering. We have a lot of work to do in the district, particularly around how we engage and support parents. Mr. Neal and I were just talking about the issue around customer service. Our families really are our customers, and it's interesting. In many communities, they don't talk a lot about what goes on in the classrooms, but they talk about all of the other issues that really impact families: homework, busing, food, communication. And people are critically saying they want to be the best partners with us, but that we have to look differently of how we both partner and support and acknowledge and respect parents in their role to make sure their kids can do the best they can. So it's been quite sobering. I hope others of you who haven't had a chance to come out do come out to these. It's well worth the time to listen.
Well, thank you, Ms. Robinson, and I want to thank you personally for representing the committee at so many of these meetings. I know you've been out at a number of these over the last couple of months. As Superintendent mentioned, there are a number of meetings that are posted on the website at the community tour page. I believe the next meeting, is there a meeting tomorrow night?
Roxbury, yep.
There is okay, so that's at Dearborn tomorrow night.
Yep.
Monday night is at English High. That's West Roxbury, Rosendale, Hyde Park, Jamaica Plain. And I believe there's another one December 3rd at
Henderson.
Henderson. So we have a few more opportunities to continue this conversation, and look forward to seeing the community out. Mr. Tron.
I would like to take this opportunity to thank Superintendent Brenda Caselius, who had graciously attended a community meeting with the Vietnamese community a couple of weeks ago,
Yeah.
regarding their concern in relation to certain school policy, and I believe that they are here today to talk about it, and I'm advocating to our members that sometimes later on maybe there should be a support for their effort. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tran, and I had an opportunity to meet some of the community earlier and say thank you for coming out tonight, and we look forward to hearing from them. Any other members for questions or discussion? Sorry.
I'm sorry, I forgot. I also wanted to let the school committee know that I have taken the interim title off of Nate Cooter and made him Chief Financial Officer if he's here.
Oh, congratulations.
He has been a tremendous asset to the team, and also as we begin to move into budget season, he's just been wonderful around framing the budget the way that I'm hoping it's going to be framed for you. We're working on a results-based budget that's aligned to the strategy and aligned to what our goals will be for our students and really the community feedback that we've gotten. And I think you're going to be very impressed with that as we begin to enter into the budget season. And I've been very impressed with him, and I'm excited to have him join the team permanently.
Well, thank you, Superintendent, and you know, Nate's been with us through a number of leaders in the financial realm, first under John McDonough and then under Chief Financial Officer Eleanor Lawrence, who departed earlier this year, and he's been an integral part of Build BPS and bringing that gargantuan effort forward and enabling us to be able to make a number of the moves that are finally coming into play and into view this year. So we thank him for all his work. We look forward to the work that he'll continue to do, and I think he will still enjoy what his greatest title is, which is not only parent but BPS parent in our system as he continues to put children first and helping us along. So congrats to Nate. I know he's not here tonight, but hope he
He might
sees
be
this
upstairs working on the budget.
later. Vice Chair, you had
Thank
some
you.
comments to add.
Thank you, Chair. I too want to thank you for all of your community meetings. I know that it's a lot on top of what you have to do, so. And always with a smile and very gracious and very open, so thank you. I do want to share some comments since we will be reviewing the strategic plan on December 11th. And just to expand on some of the comments, on Jerry's comments specifically, I think in my conversations with colleagues in the out-of-school time, I was just in a meeting, was it that yesterday? Yesterday, Dr. Coleman and I were in the same meeting around education that was hosted by Liberty Mutual, and they were giving out dollars to continue to support the college coaching and success. But some of the conversation that we had, which is not the first time that I've heard, and I just want to put it out there as we're looking at the strategic plan, is how we actually partner better. And one of the things that Jerry was talking about, which really resonates, I think, with all of the colleagues that I've talked to, is that, you know, BPS cannot be the holder of everything, so we know that. But then really thinking about what is everyone's role and how we work together across the system, and then how do we really involve the city so that we have a theory of change for youth and children. So I just want to put that out there, and I will definitely send more thoughts and comments around that, and I know that's a huge concern. Most of us in the out-of-school time are doing a lot of the social emotional development connections, internships, you know, paid experience, the coaching, the supports. And so how do we actually align that better? And I know that's another conversation around partnerships, but I think that was something that I heard that the out-of-school time really feels missing in the plan. And so how do we bring it into the plan, and what does it look like? So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Vice Chair, and Dr. Coleman, it sounds like it's right up your alley.
I thought the speaker suggested they should just
Yes,
give
sorry.
all the money that you had,
The
give to the school
speaker was-
district, and we could manage it more efficiently.
That speaker was amazing. He was really good, Dr. Woolman.
What if anyone that wants to give us more money? So 2 items on that. That's a good segue into the conversation that we had at our retreat last week, which is well summarized, I think, in the minutes that we just voted on and approved. But I want to thank my fellow members for gathering. Miss Sullivan has noted that this is now the 4th week in a row that we have met. So we've been on a bit of a on a tear lately, but nevertheless, the 2 hours last week during our retreat was time well spent, and really gave us an opportunity to hear back from the superintendent on her initial strategic planning process, give us some feedback from all that good work you've been doing in the community, and do a touch base as to where we are at with the good work that was done in 2015 around a strategic plan, and updating that plan for the needs of the school district today. And so I think, you know, a lot of the themes that we just heard from the vice chair certainly came through in that discussion. I know Dr. Coleman's been very much an advocate for a clear theory of action, and, you know, I think the term that Mr. O'Neill used was pithy in terms of what we're looking for from our strategic plan. You know, we want an elevator speech, essentially, that we can deliver to all stakeholders to say, this is what we want from our district. This is how we want our district to deliver change and better outcomes for our students. And more importantly, we want to be able to measure that in using a number of very narrowly tailored leading and lagging indicators. And so that's the work that we've charged the superintendent with continuing to develop, and we'll look forward to next month, hearing more on the strategic plan. Mr. O'Neill, looks like you want to jump in.
Just, I want to echo what Ms. Robinson was saying. The feedback she has been giving about what she has heard by being at a number of these sessions, and, you know, reflecting on what the superintendent had put out as some potential goals. I really think in a strategic plan, we should be literally calling right out customer service as a goal for us, and using language that specifically calls that out. It's about everything around getting our students ready to be in a classroom, and whether it's transportation, food, safety, cleanliness, assignment, IEPs, you name it. Until parents are comfortable with meeting all those needs, they're comfortable with the learning that's going on in the classroom, because parents like their teachers, but it's the other things around it. And I think we need to call it right out. I think I reflect on what the superintendent's saying about whether it's a top 10 place to work or parents' number one choice. The bottom line on all that is customer service. And I think we should not only call it out in the strategic plan, our dashboard should be built around that as well.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Something else I wanted to remark on, and this is on the issue of money, is we have something to celebrate today, which is that this Student Opportunity Act emerged from conference committee just yesterday. I will join in that, Mr. Heischman. And was unanimously approved by both the House and the Senate. So it moves on to the governor's desk now, and I just want to do a brief recap for folks of where we're at. So first of all, we wouldn't be where we're at now without the partnership and multi-pronged effort that we've seen from all corners of the education community all across the Commonwealth. In Boston, we've had a partnership between the mayor and the mayor's office, our Boston delegation, our teachers, our students as represented through BSAC, and a number of other parents, teacher, district advocates, and this committee who has taken the opportunity on a number of occasions to advocate both at the State House and through resolutions that we have put forth as a body in support of meaningful and reasonable change to the way that we fund public education in Massachusetts. And so this is a great day. This is the first meaningful change in public education financing since 1993. This is the product of over 5 years worth of work by all those folks that I just mentioned. And so I want to definitely give a big thanks to the House and Senate Joint Committee on Education co-chairs, Representative Peisch and Senator Lewis, and their counterparts on the conference committee that helped get this bill across the finish line, to Speaker DeLeo, to Senate President Spilka. And we hope that this gets to the governor's desk and gets right back to the House and Senate for enactment very shortly, so that we can see these changes starting in the budget for next year. And what does this mean for all of us? There were two main issues that we were hoping for in any sort of Education Financing Reform Act. One would be to fully implement the Foundation Budget Review Commission's recommendations in a way that's meaningful for the neediest students across the district and the neediest across the Commonwealth. And the neediest students across the Commonwealth are typically found in Boston and in those gateway cities around the state that haven't traditionally had the necessary supports from Chapter 70 funding, as the demographics have changed over the last 20 plus years in the Commonwealth. So we see that in the Student Opportunity Act. The other thing that we wanted was a fix to the way in which the charter reimbursement works and how other ancillary funding streams that work alongside Chapter 70 work, so that we as a city receive our full share of reimbursement for the charter costs. And so we've seen that through this bill as well. And so we can claim victory, and it was hard fought. And again, we wouldn't be here without the partnership and the advocacy of so many activist groups, so many of you in this room, so many that are watching on TV, and again, the students and teachers that we've stood shoulder to shoulder with on this. So I'm very hopeful for the trajectory that this puts this district on financially going forward. We'll need to, just as in closing, continue to advocate at the State House and with our delegation to ensure that each of the items in this bill are fully funded. Some of these items are going to be subject to the annual state budget process, and so we'll continue to do the same advocacy that we've done year in and year out up at the State House to make sure that every dollar that's possible out of the state budget that can go to education does go to education. So we'll look forward to continuing to partner with each of those individuals that have brought us here today. Are there any further questions or concerns from the committee on the current act?
No concerns or questions, but I did want to actually thank Sonia Chang Diaz because she was a huge champion from the beginning, and I know she continued even after she was moved to another committee, so I just want to thank her.
Very good, and thank you for calling her out specifically. For those of you that don't know, Senator Chang Diaz of Jamaica Plain served for many years as the co-chair of the Joint Education Committee at the State House, and was also co-chair of that Foundation Budget Review Commission that was the catalyst for the bill that's been passed today. So thank you again for calling her out specifically. Okay, if there are no further questions or discussion, I'll entertain a motion to receive the superintendent's report as presented. Thank you. That's a motion from Dr. Coleman, looks like a second from Ms. Robinson. Any discussion or objection to the motion? Any objection to receiving the superintendent's report by unanimous consent? Hearing none, the motion is approved. Before we move on to public comment, I'd like to invite our student representative, Ms. Reyes, to now present her monthly BSAC report. Ms. Reyes.
Hello all. We started off this school year with our numbers in good shape, and we are happy to report that we are almost at 100% representation on BSAC. We have only 2 high schools we are waiting on reps from, and those are Excel High School and Boston Green Academy. As I mentioned in my last report, we have a very diverse and keen working group. We recently spent an overnight together at the annual working group retreat at the Walker Center in Newton, and there we had a chance to share life stories and got to know each other as well as prioritize projects. That included looking at what priorities are linked to current Massachusetts legislation, and they include securing voting rights for the student rep on the school committee, access to menstrual products, specifically in public schools, prisons, and shelters, reducing carbon emissions, improving green infrastructure, and securing funding for access to drinkable water in public schools. And the last one is continuing to advocate for the Student Opportunity Act. This past Monday, we held elections for our officer positions. The membership this year includes many students that are excited to share their passions with the council, and that made for some fantastic speeches. Excuse me. Every candidate is giving all of the others a run for their money this year. We don't know the results yet, but I will share them next time. There are a few upcoming opportunities I would like to share. The first 2 are a series of town halls happening in 2 weeks here in these chambers. December 2nd from 5 to 7 p.m. on climate change. There will be a discussion about the history of labor unions, organizing, and the Green New Deal. And following that, December 5th, from 4:30 to 6, we have our youth community meeting with Superintendent Casalius, and we would love to see some of the committee members there. And the last thing I would like to remind folks of is the climate strike that's happening on Friday, December 6th. Students are walking out and meeting at City Hall at 10:30 that day. And although we deeply value our learning, we must also fight for the future of our planet. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Reyes. I'll open it up now to our members for questions or discussion. Ms. Robinson, excuse me.
Yeah, I just want to congratulate you on getting within 2 schools. This is, I think, the best that the representation of BSAC has ever been since we've talked about it, and so that kudos to you and to the school leaders and to all the students for getting that done. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Mr. O'Neill.
Just to follow up on that, this isn't just kudos, this is momentous. This is huge, because you can say you speak for all high school students now when you truly represent all. So I just want to make sure we heard this clearly. Did you say Boston Green Academy and Excel are the 2 that you are waiting for representatives from? And I have no doubt those school leaders, who are both outstanding, will very quickly find one, particularly when they know that's the only obstacle waiting, so for BSAC to be able to say they represent all. Are you including all the alternative high schools as well?
Yes and no.
Okay.
We are including most of them. There are some that are part of the collaborative high school that is
Sure.
difficult to pick out specific
Individual
programs
pieces of
and
it, yeah.
individuals, but we are working on that. That's that, yeah.
That's fantastic. Congratulations. And to everyone involved with BSAC, that's a huge deal when you say you speak for all students, all high school students in the city. So well done.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. So congratulations, that is pretty awesome. I just wanted to ask you, how did you do it?
This year, we had a different approach, and we sent out a Google form at the beginning of the year and asked principals if they could identify who their student council members were, and also who their BSAC representatives were, and if they could do that as part of their school council elections. Like if they wanted to elect BSAC reps, like that's a completely valid way to do it. We also asked them if they wanted to nominate students and send them right away. And there are also programs that meet outside of our time that we went to go talk to. We also sent staff out to schools to present on BSAC and what we do and inform them about our website and that sort of thing. And we got a lot of students from those interactions, like one-on-one interactions as well.
That's great. That's great. Make sure you write that down for the next set of outreach. And I just wanted to share, I'm so glad that you continue to work on the climate change. I read an article today that it just has me thinking, and I don't know if it's a question or a comment, and maybe you can explore it, but one of the things I was reading is about the anxiety that is caused by climate change by our young people and how we don't really talk about it, how we just, as adults, we're just like, climate change, the planet is coming to an end, and how we don't really talk about what you can do, and the youth. That's why I think it's so important to have the youth voice involved in the climate change. So just thinking about in the work that you guys are doing, if there's a way to think about how we are talking about climate change, that maybe you guys can be the lead to train us to make sure that we are talking hope and not creating so much anxiety. And the last thing I want to say is happy birthday on Friday. I know it's your birthday, you're gonna be 18, so happy birthday.
Ooh, 18, that's a big one.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair, and happy birthday to you as well, Ms. Reyes. Are there any further questions or comments from the committee? Well, thank you again, and we'll look forward to your December report, Ms. Reyes. We'll move on now to general public comment. And before I hand it off to Ms. Sullivan, I just want to make a brief note. We're trying out a new device tonight. Some of you might be able to see it on the table here. It's a small clock with some lights attached to it. And we're trying this out in an effort to promote consistency in the way in which we have public comment occur during the committee. There's a small timer on the box that will count down for each public speaker so that you can see how much time you have remaining. And it will be a green light when you begin speaking. There will be a yellow light that comes on when there's 30 seconds to go, and there will be a red light that then comes on, and I think there's a small warning beacon that accompanies it when the time is up. So hopefully this will be a helpful tool. We have it on loan for us for I think 30 days, so we're testing it out. We really would appreciate some feedback, good or bad, and hope it doesn't throw anybody off. So with that, thank you for your indulgence, and Ms. Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Lecanto. The public comment period is an opportunity for parents, students, and other concerned parties to make brief presentations to the school committee on pertinent school issues. Questions on specific school matters are not answered at this time, but are referred to the superintendent for later response. Questions on specific policy matters are not answered at this time, but may be the subject of later discussion by the committee. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to speak, and I will remind you when you have 1 minute remaining and then 30 seconds. Those who require interpretation services will receive an additional 2 minutes. Speakers may not reassign their time to others. Large groups addressing the same topic are encouraged to consolidate their remarks or choose a spokesperson to provide testimony. Written testimony is appreciated and encouraged. Any signage must not prohibit the participation of others. Please state your name and affiliation before you begin. TV cameras will only record speakers who face the committee. We have 10 speakers this evening, beginning with Roxanne Harvey, and she'll be followed by Laura Carroll and Mike Heichman. Is Ms. Harvey with us? Okay. Ms. Carroll, followed by Mr. Heichman.
And as Mr. Heichman, Ms. Carroll's going to come up first. And Ms. Carroll is approaching the table. I just want to note that our Spanish interpreter has arrived. Could the Spanish interpreter please rise and introduce yourself briefly en español? Okay, thank you. If anyone does need interpretive services, you can see the young lady in the back, or Miss, is Lena outside, Miss Parvex? Yes, Miss Parvex is still outside at the front desk. Miss Carroll, please.
Thank you. So do I need to touch
I'll
some? This is just like being in court. The appeals
Glad
court
you're the
does-
first one to break it in.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm very excited about this. I do want to note, I'm here, as the committee knows, on behalf of the Harbor Point Community Task Force, once again to talk about the McCormick Fields. I do note that there is one Harbor Point representative who wanted to speak tonight. If he does not get here in time, we will submit his comments separately to the committee in writing, if that's all right. As you know, I've sent prior letters about Harbor Point's concerns. I appreciate that the chair has responded by identifying, in a letter I received late today, responding with the meetings that have been held concerning the McCormick Fields issue. I'd like to take sort of a high-level view of that, in that there were initial meetings about the McCormick Fields, at which, among other things, over a year ago, the Harbor Point was suggesting that they come in and do a renovation of the fields to make them more usable for students at the McCormick School and in the community. And there were meetings about that in 2018. After the RFP was issued with no notice to Harbor Point, the only meetings since then have been what I would call sales pitch meetings by the Boys and Girls Club of Dorchester trying to sell their proposed field house. They have not been meetings of what would people like to see here, what would make sense. It's been more, here's this wonderful field house we want to build, let us convince you how great it will be. So while input is being sought, it's not really that. It feels a lot more like a political campaign, vote for me being the field house. From a high level, I'd really like the committee to step back and say, if they are sincere, if BPS is sincere about Build BPS and sincere about the McCormick School becoming a grade 7 to 12 school with triple the enrollment, which means it's got to be a lot bigger building, ask yourselves, how does it make sense to give away or sell or lease or however it would be done the playing fields to another organization? You don't do that with any other schools. You don't say we're building a high school here and by the way we're giving away the playing fields.
30 seconds.
So that, no, I see the yellow light pink. So I really would urge the committee to pull back the RFP, to say it's not appropriate to do now. Come up with the plans for the McCormick School, what that's going to look like, what their needs will be. Then you can figure out if there should be a giveaway of the land to another organization.
Well timed. Thank you, Ms. Carroll. And thank you for noting, I'm sorry I was tardy in getting a response back to you, but I'm glad you received it this afternoon.
Well, I was reading it on the Silver Line homecoming here, so.
Mr. Heichman.
Mike Heichman, Dorchester, retired teacher from Chelsea. My daughter graduated from the Boston Arts Academy in 2009, and I'm still here working on behalf of all of our children to have a wonderful education. I'm very excited to be here. I want to thank Mr. O'Neill for confirming that if I don't stand up at the end of the 3 minutes, that I'm going to get a mild electric shock. But he wasn't sure if be mild or not. But thank you.
I said trapdoor.
Right. I'm also very excited to be here because of the report from our student rep. I'm also an active member of Boston Education Justice Alliance, and I heard about the student strike. And yesterday, Beeger has endorsed your strike. And I want to say to all of you, this is very exciting. I'm an old man. I just turned 73 years old. And I have a prayer. I have a prayer that all of my children, my own and all of my other children, will live to be old people. And I think it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful, that children especially are exercising leadership, not only here but around the world. So I asked the school department, strike, walk out. Yes, this is something that we need to support, not to punish. And please put on the website all this information about December 2nd, December 5th, and December 6th. I will be there on December 6th to support your action, and I hope the whole community will be there too. I'm also excited because it's the first time that I'm meeting the new superintendent of schools, and I a few months ago had a unique opportunity. I actually testified in support of a candidate who was selected by the school committee to be our superintendent of schools. And wow, what an exciting time for me to meet with you. As other people know, I'm usually here, and I usually are very critical and very angry and yelling sometimes about the behavior of the school committee and the mayor in terms of how we mistreat our kids. And I'm hoping to learn some new skills like appreciation. So I want to practice right now. Dr. C, you're doing a wonderful job. Thank you. I only have a few more seconds, and I said one of the major reasons why I wanted to speak was in support of the budget. And yes, thank you. What a wonderful victory at the State House today, which Bezier and Major and I specifically have been supporting for quite some time. And let's have a new budgetary process, not one where the mayor comes in with a lousy budget that you thank him for, but a budget that serves the interest of all of our children to have a quality education. I yield the rest of my time for the next time I testify.
Thank you, Mr. Heischman.
He's been watching the impeachment hearing.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Thong Wen with Annie Lee, and she'll be followed by Van Parvez and Ruby Reyes.
Her story is so compelling. You're really gonna enjoy her story. Her story is very compelling.
Good evening.
Hi. Thank you, school committee. Thank you for inviting us. I'm gonna have Yetung here speak first, and then she's gonna speak in Vietnamese, and then I'm gonna read her testimony in English as well.
Okay, thank you.
Kính chào quý vị. Tôi tên là Lê Thương. Tôi đến từ nhóm song ngữ của người Việt. Và tôi đến nước Mỹ năm 2011 và hiện là thành viên trong hội người lớn tuổi ở Dorchester. Đến năm 2014, tôi được may mắn được làm việc trong hội cao niên gồm người Việt bản xứ và người Mỹ gốc Việt. Hiện đa số các gia đình người Việt ở đây, trong lúc ba mẹ đi làm để lo cuộc sống thì các cháu ở nhà với ông bà. Chúng tôi dùng tiếng Việt làm ngôn ngữ chính. Ngoài sự kết nối gần gũi, người già chúng tôi bất cảm thấy cô đơn, buồn tẻ. Còn các cháu thì được học tiếng Việt, được hiểu biết về cội nguồn và những nét đẹp dân tộc Việt qua những tranh ảnh và các câu chuyện được kể. Khi đến 5 tuổi, các cháu được cấp sách đến trường và cũng từ đây các cháu bỏ thói quen nói tiếng Việt và dùng tiếng Anh được học trong trường để nói ở nhà. Là một công dân người Mỹ gốc Việt hiện đang sinh hoạt cùng con và các cháu được sinh ra từ đất nước Mỹ, tôi cảm nhận chương trình song ngữ này đem lại nhiều lợi ích, như học thêm ngôn ngữ, giúp cho bộ não của các cháu phát triển hơn về trí nhớ, về suy nghĩ và sự tập trung, cũng như giúp các cháu hiểu biết sâu sắc về văn hóa Việt, và đó cũng là một thế mạnh cho nghề nghiệp của các cháu sau này. Nhờ các cháu nói được tiếng Việt, chúng tôi cảm thấy được gần gũi hơn. Sự kết nối khăng khít giữa các thế hệ là vô giá và cần củng cố nó để các cháu cảm nhận được tình yêu thương và sự quan tâm từ phía ba mẹ và ông bà của mình và cả ông bà ở trong cộng đồng người lớn tuổi. Do vậy, chúng tôi ủng hộ chương trình song ngữ này để giúp các cháu và ông bà trong cộng đồng. Ở Việt Nam, tôi là một giáo viên cấp 1 với 32 năm trong nghề giảng dạy. Tôi mong ước được tham gia và chia sẻ một ít kinh nghiệm trong nghề giáo của mình để giúp cho chương trình song ngữ nhận được sự đồng thuận từ phía phụ huynh và ông bà trong cộng đồng, để có thể duy trì sự đa dạng văn hóa cho các thế hệ sau của người Mỹ gốc Việt. Bản thân tôi có thể truyền một chút nhiệt huyết của người giáo qua công tác thiện nguyện cùng các thầy cô giáo cũng như các thành viên khởi xướng chương trình để có thể mang lại nhiều kết quả theo đúng tinh thần của chương trình đối với các cháu sau này. Cảm ơn các bạn đã cho chúng tôi, những người cao tuổi, có cơ hội để nói vấn đề này. Chúng tôi rất vui được góp phần giữ gìn ngôn ngữ tiếng Việt và tăng thêm giá trị cho một cộng đồng đa dạng văn hóa. Xin chân thành cảm ơn tất cả quý vị.
Ladies and gentlemen, I came to the United States in 2011, and I joined the Kit Clark Senior Services for 4 years. I'm currently a member of the Vietnamese American community in Dorchester, and I was lucky to have the opportunity to work here, where I meet people from different backgrounds, including Vietnamese American folks like myself. Like most families, Vietnamese parents in the United States work hard to provide food and necessities for a living. After school, most Vietnamese parents would have their children stay with grandparents. With grandparents around, things work out for working parents and for the young children to have someone over them. At home, grandparents use Vietnamese as the main language to communicate with our grandchildren. This not only brings us closer connection between us and our grandchildren, but also helps us feel less lonely and dull in our elderly years. In return, our grandchildren get to hear Vietnamese folk tales, understand the origin of the country, and see the beauty of Vietnam through pictures and paintings. Unfortunately, starting at the age of 5, children tend to turn away from speaking Vietnamese and get in the habit of using English that they learn in school to speak at home. As a Vietnamese American, I have lived together with my children and spent time with my grandchildren who were born here in the United States. I am more than just sad to see the Vietnamese dual language program cease, and I know that elderlies like myself will be in loneliness when our children slowly disconnect from us because of language barriers. If my grandchildren were not able to speak Vietnamese, I would not be able to share the life experience, the history, or the culture of Vietnam. Our grandchildren will grow up missing links that are a part of who they are. Having the Vietnamese dual language program will help alleviate the language barriers, tighten family bonds, and help our children and grandchildren understand the value of their culture and origin. In addition, when children learn a second language, it enhances their brain developments. I strongly feel that the Vietnamese dual language program will bring a lot of benefits. Thank you. And then we have this also written to as well. Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And you can
Thank you.
submit that in writing to Ms. Sullivan, and she'll make sure that we all get a copy.
She has it here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Van Parvez, followed by Ruby Reyes and Rondik Ahmed.
Good evening.
Hi, good evening to members of the school committee. My name is Van Pervez. I'm a library teacher at the Dearborn STEM Academy. I'm here as a member of Vietnamese Dual Language Committee. For the past 2 years, this committee has been working very hard to get the program off the ground. We have been visiting schools, talking to the principals, talking to the superintendent, to the Boston Teachers Union, to members of the community. You can see the summary in our handout. You just heard the testimony from a parent. I will quickly go over the benefits of the dual program, as you can see from the posters. The benefits for the students are as follows: high academic achievement in 2 languages, apply those skills to succeed in the global economy, promote cross-cultural competency, build leadership and self-confidence, develop strong school and family connections. There are 2 issues that the Vietnamese Dual Program Committee would like to discuss with you. Number 1, the Vietnamese community at Viet 8, in partnership with the BPS Universal Pre-K program and the Office of English Learners, was approved to open 2 kindergarten K1 classes as the first Vietnamese dual program in Massachusetts. In 2020-2021 school year, those 2 K1 classes will move to a BPS school, but so far we have not found a school willing to receive the program. The school the parents prefer are the Murphy and the Kenny, but neither currently have a space for the program to grow. By this I mean each year the program will add up 2 classes to the school. The school that seems to have enough space for the dual program is not what parents prefer. That is our dilemma. Our wish is that you can have a school that we can collaborate as parents to create a program that honors our language, culture, and adds to the rich opportunities in BPS. Number 2, besides finding the site for the 2 K1 classes from Viet 8 program, we also need teachers as well as professional development for them and their curriculum. The Vietnamese dual language community hopes that you will approve a budget for this program moving forward. In conclusion, our hopes are that the superintendent and your office will look into this matter in supporting the Vietnamese community in finding a site and funding a sustainable budget for the implementation of the Vietnamese dual language program. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pervez.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ruby Reyes, and she'll be followed by Rondik Ahmed and Izaf Hussein.
Good evening, Ms. Reyes.
Good evening. My name is Ruby Reyes. I'm the Boston Education Justice Alliance Director. We need a new way of budgeting in the Boston Public Schools. Beja represents a growing number of parents, students, and teachers who are working on our vision for what each school should have. In the current system of weighted student funding, when one school wins, another experiences budget loss. We have seen this year after year, and it doesn't work. Stop it. As we move into budget season, Beja asks that you replace school budget cuts from last year and create foundational school budgets in addition to equity-based allocations of funding for students with high needs. A foundational school budget pays for at least the basic staff and school conditions needed to give every BPS student a quality education. You cannot claim to want a quality education for every student and then deny some students, mostly low-income students of color, the staff that can make it possible. Our vision includes necessities such as comprehensive staffing and student support to meet all student needs, including a family engagement coordinator at each school, 2 teachers and a para in each inclusion classroom, diverse, culturally proficient school leaders and teachers who reflect the diversity of their students, and clean, up-to-date facilities with regular maintenance. We challenge you to put forth your vision, then work with the city to find the resources for it. Last year, East Boston experienced over $2 million in school budget cuts, while Dorchester felt over $1.5 million in cuts, and Mattapan schools had a loss of over $1 million. Boston is an incredibly rich city. Here are some ways to fund it. Put pressure on our wealthiest nonprofits to pay their fair share of payment in lieu of taxes. Harvard, BU, BC, and Northeastern combined owe $98 million in back taxes. Last year's parking fees doubled. In addition, we are on the eve of the governor signing the Student Opportunity Act. We ask that those funds be reflected in schools that have experienced the largest budget decreases over the past 5 years. Create equity by investing in schools who are being financially starved and the students who have to weather your decisions. Each year, there are schools, teachers, and families that are asked to do more with less. This doesn't have to happen. If you want to close achievement gaps, you need to close funding gaps. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reyes.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Rondik Ahmed, followed by Isaf Hussein and Ann Malone.
Have Mr. Hussein, he's not really. Oh, okay. That's what he was going to say.
Okay, thank you. Good evening.
Evening.
I am Randik Ahmed, a resident of Harbor Point and a parent of Dever Elementary School students. During the past 3 years, there has been many development about the quality of education at Dever and McCormick schools. As you know, the Dever remains in receivership. However, many students seem to thrive, acquiring strong academic foundation at both schools. I am an immigrant from Kurdistan, a former student of neighboring schools, now a college graduate working at the biopharma industry. The main reason I'm testifying before you today is to express, on behalf of my family, friends, and neighbors, our strong disapproval with the construction of a large building on the current McCormick athletic field. Clearly, neither residents nor McCormick students, teachers have supported this proposal, a proposal from the only one applicant to a very devious RFP process. This land is in the stewardship of Boston Public Schools system. It is a land that belongs to the taxpayers, us, not a piece of land to be disposed of without considering the wishes of the most affected, the immediate neighborhood. You have already heard from many others about this issue, but allow me to tell you, this issue is very personal for me and my family. I don't want my kids to move on to a high school with an open space to get vital sunlight, relieve academic stress, play different sports, participate in outdoor academic activities, build friendships, breathe fresh air, among many other benefits of outdoor spaces. This is quality of life. This is part of our kids' development. Lastly, many Boston public schools would dream to have an open space like the one at the McCormick. So please do not allow this valuable land to become an unnecessary structure you will regret. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ann Malone, followed by David Noyles.
Good evening. Thank you, everyone, school committee, superintendent, members of the public, BPS staff. I'm a, let's see, how many years has it been? It's my 15th year as a Boston public school parent in 3 different schools. One of my children has special needs on the autism spectrum and ADHD, although every child has special needs, they're all unique, but we had some really challenging issues that for the most part, BPS was really responsive to, so I want to just say that out loud, and we appreciate that. I also am active in the Citywide Parent Council, although the remarks I'm making tonight are my own. And I benefited from partnering with members of the school staff at the elementary schools, the Manning, the Curley, and parents working on improving school food. I'm a community health nurse, and so seeing the problems with nutrition in the schools was a real concern, and the ethical issues of who we were paying our money to ship in like food from New York that was frozen and really inedible. And so very grateful that, you know, the advocacy and students standing in front of the school with signs protesting no more chicken nuggets, we want fresh food, that we were able to improve it some with Revolution Foods, and then the My Way Cafe is even moving further in the positive direction. But what I'm really here to emphasize is the need for comprehensive K-12 health education. I feel like I'm amazed that I haven't spoken up on this before. I feel really professionally and personally irresponsible because it's in the booklet that we get every year that BPS offers K-12 health education, and it talks about it in really positive ways, but there's no funding for it. We don't have health education teachers. You know, I think there's maybe 3, like the EMK has 1 full-time health ed teacher. It's a Health Careers Academy, and there's efforts to train teachers, like if a math teacher wants to go get trained on sex health education and try and implement it. So maybe in the real time, if that's all you can do this year, okay, but especially with the student opportunity bill and funding coming down the pike, can we please make that a priority? And I didn't bring my phone up, but I just was looking online, and there's this amazing state website about the value of health education and how it prepares students to care about their bodies, to have healthy behaviors and have healthier nutrition and, you know, less risky behaviors around drug and alcohol use and nicotine. My son got addicted to Juul in high school. The Juuling room was the certain bathroom, and I didn't know till after he graduated that he was addicted. It's been a horrible, horrible experience. And then there's even data about how elementary school students in K through, and starting in kindergarten, getting comprehensive health education, have higher reading and math scores. I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it? Healthier children are more ready to learn, and there's less school absences. So I really want to push this up the priority list, and also give a shout out to the opportunity and achievement gap folks, because I think it's an equity issue, and it will help support the work that they're doing that I'm so impressed with. I'm sorry, I thought that was my 30-second. So sorry. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Malone. Our next speaker is David Noyles.
Good evening.
Hi, my name is David Noyles. I represent Roxbury Environmental Empowerment Project, which is the youth program under Alternatives for Community and Environment, which is a nonprofit environmental justice group or organization. I'm not going to take up too much of your time. You see me at least once a year, so hi everybody. What I came to talk to y'all about is the McCormick Green Space that they potentially may be losing because of this RFP. I don't live in Harbor Point. I live right up the street from here. But when a teacher and a bunch of middle school students say that we want to keep our green space because this is the only green space that we have and that we know only when we go to school and not in our homes, as a person that went from the Mission Hill projects to Grove Hall to having a backyard and having trees and seeing what that did for me as far as like my depression, and seeing how as a young person facing depression and being able to play outside in grass and seeing how that developed me as a person that I am today. Knowing that young people may not get that same opportunity of being around grass, being around trees, or just being outside in the open air means a lot to me. So where I know the McCormick and Harbor Point is not my actual community, those young people, I consider them family and my home. So I'm here to ask y'all, and I will be back here every Wednesday at 6 o'clock when y'all have these school committee meetings, because that's what these young people asked of me. So I'm not here for myself. I'm here for these young people that's pleading to you to keep their green space. Let them have their grass. I'll be back next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. LeConte. That concludes our speakers for general public comment.
Well, thank you, Ms. Sullivan. Our first action item this evening is the consent calendar, which consists of in-kind donations with a total estimated value of $488,887.38, as well as grants for approval totaling $308,787. I'll open it up now to questions and comments from the committee. Ms. Robinson.
Yes, I saw that particularly on the Donors Choose Foundation. You know, that's a lot of in-kind. It would be great to have a clearer understanding of what the various projects are. I saw that we did get a couple, but these are numerous, and it would be good for us to understand overall what are the kinds of things that teachers are asking for, and how we begin to look at our own budget and by schools to understand what we are and are not providing. I mean, it's wonderful that we're able to get these donated, but you know, we really need to understand why it needs to be donated and why we aren't able to pick up some of these costs ourselves within the school district.
Well, thank you, Ms. Robinson. And as you may recall, and for others watching, we do this in-kind donation report now on a quarterly basis, and that's managed by, I believe, the Partnership Office. So I'm sure that, I don't know if there's anyone here tonight that can speak to that, but certainly we can ask the Partnership Office, Mr. Hanson, we can ask the Partnership Office to follow up with a specific report of those items and provide that to the committee.
Was
Is that
you
something
just want yeah, I can
Is that
provide, so
possible?
just so you know, it's roughly 16,000 items over 3 months. So several, I want to say about 1,000 projects. So it's a lot to go in a paper copy, but I'd be happy to provide
But even
that.
if it's a summation that's saying, you know, a lot of it is they want iPads, or, you know, what are the types of things that people are asking for?
Yeah, I would certainly say, you know, the high value items are technology, and OIIT is involved in that. So I receive a monthly report as well as OIIT, and then I share that again with the technology department as well as the school superintendents, so that we're all aware of what's going on. Yeah, dollar-wise, probably technology is pretty high up, but it's a lot of books. A lot of like rugs and things to get the classrooms to feel, you know, especially for the younger grades, But then they also, you know, everything, tissues, hand sanitizer, lab equipment for some of the older grades. If there's a special lab that the teachers want to run, they can work through the vendors that Donors Choose have to get that equipment as well. So it's a wide variety of items.
Thank you.
And I can,
Sure.
yeah, it's a very long list, but I'm happy to share.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. And if you could just provide some sort of follow-up summary there, I think that would be beneficial for the committee. I think one other area that probably falls under the Donors Choose category is travel as well. I know there's that might not be rolled up through the in-kind donations, but certainly I know there's a number of students that fundraise for international trips in particular. So if you have anything to that effect.
So probably not through Donors Choose, but I can, so you're talking about students raising money for themselves to travel?
Through the
Like a
through the schools,
GoFundMe,
yeah.
like a GoFundMe page?
Well, I think there's I don't want to get off on a tangent.
Okay.
But,
I can certainly look,
if there
dig
are
into
other,
the
if that's an
numbers
additional,
and-
thank
yes,
you, that would be
I'll
great
find
to
that
add
out.
that in.
Great, thank you.
Dr. Coleman.
Yeah, Bill, building up, I would love to see the analysis, percent awarded by tier. So how many are tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 schools or whatever. That would be my analysis. There may be another better equity analysis. I'll let the experts address that, but I would like, doesn't have to be in huge detail, but just that kind of really summary, high level, you know, by tier, who's getting what. And the other question I don't understand, how do people get this Donor Choose? So, you know, my kids are teaching and I'm always getting these, I'm getting hit up regularly by that amount, and Oakland Tech's getting a lot of my money.
Sure. So the way that Donor Choose sets up their platform is that only teachers or some school staff, like nurses and things like that, can post projects. So we at the central office and school leaders, principals, and headmasters actually are not allowed on their platform to post the project. So it would be initiated by a teacher, and then the way the function works is that either that teacher and those parents and that school community can have people go onto that webpage and donate directly. Donors Choose, as a national organization, also has some national partnerships and works with organizations. I think there's a note on the agenda item today. So actually, Volkswagen is partnered with America Scores, and so Volkswagen made a donation to every city. So because that America Scores works in, so because we have Boston Scores here, Volkswagen donated to Boston, just in general, not to specific projects. Once the projects are funded, teachers can go in and order through Donors Choose with their approved list of vendors, and then we receive the items. So our teachers never receive any money. There's, we just sort of put the request out there, and then we receive the stuff.
And to what I think was part of Ms. Robinson's point, it's that we don't want to control initiative and people's ability to reach out. But when we look at the equity analysis, we may need to think about how we may have to supplement maybe differentially as a response to what may be coming in.
And I will say, when a project is posted, the school is notified. And then again, I receive monthly reports, not only of what has been sent, but also all of the projects that are live. And that information is also distributed so that here we do have eyes on, you know, what is being requested.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman, and thank you again, Mr. Hanson. Are there further questions from the committee? Comments on the grants? Well, thank you again, Mr. Hanson, for making yourself available. If there's nothing further, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar as presented. Thank you, Vice Chair. Is there a second? Ms. Robinson. Any discussion or objection to the motion? Any objection to the motion, approving the grants by unanimous consent? Hearing none, the consent calendar is approved. Our next action item is the updated field trip policy, and you'll recall at our last meeting, Director of Global Education, Kayla Dorsey-Chumezi, presented the superintendent's updated field trip policy recommendation. And as you'll further recall, the proposed policy requires an assessment of trip risks, district and field safety protocols, increased student supervision, annual assessments of emergency response systems, and insurance, and allows for the revision and addition of field trip specific circulars as needed. And an important note, as many of you will recall, is this is this also includes a fundamental change in the way that we approve international trips, and this marks the district essentially coming full circle from where it was in 2011. We didn't have an organized policy as a school committee, nor did we have a particularly good process or a consistent process as a district in vetting trips, both domestically and to foreign lands on any number of the levels that we just noted. So there was a school committee policy that was enacted in 2011, which required the school committee to take votes to approve any international trip. And as part of the policy proposal tonight, in addition to all of the procedural updates and innovations that I just mentioned and were presented to us last week, we would also do away with the school committee vote on any international trips going forward. The effort there is to make this process, quite frankly, more efficient and hand this work back to the professionals that have modernized this process, and allow the Department of Global Education, the superintendent, school superintendents, and the CFO to jointly approve any of those trips. As part of the proposal, the school committee will still receive monthly updates as to where all of our students are traveling internationally. And we will also receive an annual report from the Global Education Department on our trips, both foreign and domestic. And as we've discussed in the past, those reports will include equity analyses that will demonstrate where trips are being allocated across our district and what kind of students are going on those trips from a demographic perspective. So Ms. Chumezi has a small modification that she'd like to speak to that has been inserted in the policy since the presentation was made 2 weeks ago, and I'll hand it off to her now to speak to that.
Good evening. The two modifications that have been made to the policy since the last presentation are as follows. The first is under the equity section, and we would like to add, if students are charged individual fees for participation in a domestic instructional field trip that is directly linked to the curriculum and standards, the district should make every effort to provide scholarships where need is expressed. For international field trips, in addition to learning outcomes and safety for schools shall also prioritize affordability and are recommended to plan at least a year in advance in an effort to fundraise and accommodate various family budgets. The second update is under the access section, and we would like to add, to thoroughly support a student's participation in a field trip at least 6 weeks before departure, consult with and when necessary, receive training from the school nurse regarding any students who have medical needs and the school counselor regarding mental and behavioral health needs.
Well, thank you, Ms. Chumezi, and I want to first thank the Vice Chair for raising the first issue on affordability, and also for your further work with the nurses in making that urgent update. I wanted to open it up now to members for any further questions or input on the changes that have been made or the policy that's been proposed.
Yes,
Ms. Robinson.
yeah. Yes, particularly in relationship to the first, I don't know whether we have any kind of district information about how field trips, particularly at the elementary level, are being handled now, and if in fact some schools are not taking field trips because of additional costs, et cetera. And I think that would get back to another issue around equity and opportunity gaps. So I'm not sure how that gets assessed, whether your office collects data on just the international trips or whether school by school the kinds of field experiences kids are having grade by grade, if we have any information about schools that take trips, the schools that don't take field trips, et cetera.
Right, so currently my office collects data on the international field programs that take place, and I also receive some data on the overnight domestic trips that take place as well, but not the day-to-day. Those are approved by the principals.
Okay, yeah. Is there
That
a way
doesn't
that
mean
we
we
can-
can't collect it, though.
Right.
Pardon me?
We can collect that
Yes,
information,
that
though.
would be interesting just to hear, to make sure that kids are equitably having opportunities to explore the city, et cetera.
Another good
you.
piece with this discussion is also just around equity and who has the opportunity to be able to take field trips, and the expectation, like setting of an expectation of field trips are important. Field study is part of using the city as a classroom. And so as we think about curriculum and the opportunities for children to use sources outside of the school classroom, how are those equitably being set as a standard within our curricular expectations?
Thank you.
Ms. Robinson, I think when we have our first report on this new policy, it'll probably occur towards the end of the school year. And that might give the district an appropriate amount of time to try to start collecting this information. So Superintendent, we'll leave it to you to take that on and continue to have these conversations about what might be appropriate. Dr. Coleman.
Yes, in the report, in the policy, and correct me if I'm wrong, as I read it, that it says only BPS students can go on BPS-approved trips. Did I read that correctly?
Correct.
And I want to raise up the question whether there's a process for variance on that, because I'm thinking about the great trip that our students got to go with Newton on an international Olympiad trip, because they had room for our students and enhance our resources. And are there places when we may be partnering with other schools, or it may be useful to other schools, Chelsea, Quincy, other schools, where we would be able to provide opportunities that would be useful in this larger environment? And I just wonder, so I just noted that seemed one of those reasonable ideas that the rigidity may prevent opportunity for others. So just want to raise that up as a question.
So there's definitely space for collaboration between Boston Public School students and students outside of BPS. The policy would just cover our students, and we would be responsible for our students, but it does allow them to collaborate on different programs, such as the Olympiad that took place over the summer in Russia with other students. But they would not obviously follow our policies, but our BPS students would be responsible for adhering to our policies.
So they'd be coordinated districts?
Yes.
So we say BPS only, but that doesn't mean we can't coordinate with Chelsea or Somerville in putting
Correct.
together a trip?
Correct.
Okay, good, thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman. Mr. Tran.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for adding the language to the policy. However, I do have some comments as well as some questions. The additional language, okay, given the sentence before it, schools shall make every reasonable effort to make instructional field trips affordable for all students. Now, the additional language may or may not satisfy the concerns regarding socioeconomic classes of students. I don't see any language that would reflect the requirement of diversity. Should we have that, given the fact that reasonable effort from the school, from the school side may vary between different or among different school administration. My concern is, yes, the language does cover socioeconomic, but it does not cover diversity. And I don't know
Well, Mr.
whether
Tran,
we should add some language that put some requirement on the school administration for diversity in field trips.
Mr. Tran, if I can jump in, this was language that was added as a result of this committee's input at the last meeting. And I think your point's well taken, but I think what I would suggest as well is that the idea of adding access through socioeconomic means as a proxy for increasing diversity amongst students that have the means to attend field trips that might otherwise have a cost going along with them. particularly in a district such as ours that's 87% people of color. So I think your point's well taken. I wonder whether it would be necessary to add any additional language that would be, in my view at least, duplicative of what the effort is behind the language that's been proposed. And I say that as a sort of like an open query to my fellow members about whether we need additional language to hit that point. And I would look to others that originally proposed this to weigh in if they feel the need to do so.
Well, for tracking the data of who goes, and we see that there's maybe economic diversity, but not cultural diversity,
Mm-hmm.
that would not an unsurprising outcome, depending who's comfortable going with whom, that then we should be able to respond then.
Mm-hmm. Is that anything further there?
No, thank you. I think
Okay.
that point is very well taken. Thank you.
So is there language then that we would be that would be proposed by the committee to accomplish this this goal?
Well, we've asked for an equity analysis already.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so that's what that's what I was
We should be
asking.
getting the data, and then
I
we'll
must
look at the data.
I must have misunderstood your input, Dr. Coleman. I thought your comment was to add the language to reinforce what the equity report would be. But I think we're on the same page in that the equity report should be sufficient to demonstrate that we are achieving the increase in access that this additional language was intended to create.
And then if we
That should
don't,
be-
we can respond in that.
And that should reflect the
And it's-
cultural diversity as well.
Yeah, and that meets your concerns,
Yes,
Mr. Tran?
thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. O'Neill?
May I just strictly thank you for your work on this. This is light years ahead of where we have been on field trip policy overall. This is really excellent work, and I want to thank you for listening to the committee's concerns, but also thinking through how this plays through. And the more, as I said last time, the more we can get our students to understand the city as a classroom, nature as a classroom, and the world as a classroom is great, and getting more of our students these opportunities. But thinking through all these things you added about water activities and homestay programs, et cetera, really well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill.
So I just want to make
Superintendent.
a general, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make a general comment about the fact of having instructional field trips. And I believe that if it is instructional and it is part of a student's grade, we should be finding the money for the students to go to it. So I am working to work on our budget, and I'm still learning about where all the budget is and how we put aside funding for these opportunities for our students. And so just know, as we think about equity, there are a lot of opportunities for children to take field trips that are optional and fun activities to do, but if they are linked to your instructional program and to the actual grade that you're going to get in a class and part of your learning and part of the academic standard, we ought to be providing that. And so part of that's going to be taken care of in the curriculum, and part of that, in our curricular expectations for what is field trips, and then how we budget for those and budget for an equitable education. But I think also what you'll see me bringing back forward to you overall is general fee policy in the district, and doing some work when we start looking at policies around fees and the fees that we are asking children to pay for their education or for other opportunities, and how we can mitigate those centrally or through a more intentional process. And so look for that. It's something that I have been harping on for years around fees and how fees limit our children's opportunity to music, to private lessons, to opportunities for children to do athletics. Just a $10 fee for art or something like that, art supplies, will keep a child from selecting an art class. And so you just expect that will be coming forward as an equity measure.
Well, that's great to hear, Superintendent, and thank you for raising that issue. I think, you had the perspective of coming from elsewhere, where I think, the dialogue about do we charge students for an activities fee for athletics or for transportation is a much more common conversation. And it's not been the conversation in BPS for a number of years because all of those quote-unquote extracurriculars have been provided free of charge through the district. But I think to your point, it's just that. Those are extracurriculars. Those are things that you can choose to do or opt into. Whereas something that's being required that's instructionally based and is additive to a student's academic experience is something that we really should tackle as an equity focus for the district. So thank you for raising that. Excuse me. Dr. Rivera.
So yes, thank you again for all your work on this. Just want to again second what's been said already. As a parent, I was really disappointed last year that my son did not go on a single field trip the entire year. And the reason for that was the buses, having to pay for a bus. And I think at least, at minimum, we should be able to provide the buses. So I just hope that we can really think about that for allocating the budget, that at least, please, we can provide the buses for field trips, because they're very expensive.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rivera. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you for working on this, and this is the first time I've seen all of the documents, so I just want to say that the attention to detail, because, these are trips, and as a mom, I know that, my daughter, she knows how I am, scoping out where she is, what she's doing, who she's with. One of the things that I did want to comment on, and thank you also for updating that piece that I talked about last time. I just have a question that I didn't see that, and you can address it, is my concern around the Corey and Sorry. So I only saw the Corey, and I'm wondering if you also do Sorry, because Corey does not have level 2 and level 3, and if you can just talk about that, or if there's a reason why there's not a Sorry.
Typically, for the field trips, they're only required to do the Corey form. However, we can definitely implement the Sorry.
I think it would just be another safety measure for our young people, because the Corey, again, doesn't cover the level 2 and level 3, and it is a free thing to do. You don't have to pay for it. It's on the website. You can put it online. It's just another, I think, good practice, especially if we're, sending students off to sleepover, et cetera. So, thank you.
Thank you for that.
And Vice Chair, on that point, were you raising stories specifically for overnight trips only or for all trips?
I think just overnight, because I would assume that during the day, you're essentially together on a field trip. I mean, I don't know.
Well, what I would suggest, I've worked on some of these policies in my day job, and to the extent that the danger, the potential for danger is raised is when you get a student into a situation where they're in a one-on-one, behind closed doors with an individual. So I think there's probably some pretty well developed and pre-existing policies around how we manage risk management around that issue. So I think I'd be interested in hearing further from the district on how that gets integrated here.
Yeah, because I saw it for only the two students together in the overnights, but not on the actual field trips. It does not delineate that.
Okay.
So I don't know if that.
Okay. Well, if we could get feedback on that, I think that'd be great. And I'm sorry, Superintendent, you sounded like you had something to add.
That's what I was wondering. I was just wondering the policies.
Yes. I'm sure that there's one out there for everything. Was that it, Vice Chair? Okay, thank you. Well, thank you to my fellow members. I know this has been an important issue for us, and I appreciate the input that everyone has provided over time. I want to make sure that everybody's been heard and has had an opportunity to ask questions and provide comments. Well, thank you again, Ms. Dorsey Chumezi, for all your work here, and again, for bringing our policies, our practices so far forward in terms of professionalism and comprehensiveness. And we look forward to the work that will happen here. Thank you to Ms. Lazat as well for her work on this series of policies. So going forward, I'll ask for a motion to implement, let me make sure I have the name correct. What's the name of our policy that we are voting on? The updated field trip policy. That's very simple. Is there a motion to approve the field trip policy as presented? Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Is there a second? Anyone from this side of the room tonight? Dr. Rivera, any discussion or objection to the motion? Ms. Sullivan, will you please call the roll?
Dr. Coleman?
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Dr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Robinson?
Yes.
Mr. Tran?
Yes.
Ms. Oliver Davila?
Yes.
Mr. Lecanto?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Well, thank you once more, and best of luck in your work, and we'll look forward to seeing you back here later this year.
Thank you.
And thanks again, Kathy. I don't know if you heard me earlier. Thanks for all your work here. We really appreciate it. Okay, moving on. Our final action item this evening is an update to the BPS Code of Conduct. You'll recall at our last meeting, Mr. Sam DePina, who's approaching the podium, Secondary Superintendent of School Operations and Safety, presented the superintendent's recommendations to add language to Section 4 of the BPS Code of Conduct, which would prohibit the revocation of physical activity, including recess, as a disciplinary consequence for any other reason other than illness or safety. The recommendation is in response to a request made by several members, including the Vice Chair and myself, at the October 30th meeting. Now, at this time, Mr. DePina is going to provide an update on a small modification that's been made to the proposed language since when this initial proposal came before us. This deals with school leader oversight for any of the limited exceptions to this rule. Mr. DePina.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. In speaking with some of our colleagues, the school superintendents specifically, they have some concerns around if we're going to remove someone from recess for illness or safety, that we add that layer of oversight. We wanted to ensure that there was a high level of accountability so that that authority was not misused by other staff members. So that's why we recommended the change.
Well, thank you again for that brief summary, and we appreciate the update. I think it's a common sense addition, and we thank the school superintendents for their feedback. I want to open this up to a brief opportunity for questions and comments before we move on to a vote. Vice Chair?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, the information, how does the information get beyond the principals? So I might be a principal that I don't necessarily buy into this policy. And, you know, I don't want to be negative, but I'm just saying that I'd like to make sure that this policy is followed. So what's the accountability beyond the principal? Do principals have to report back to central? Like, how does that all work?
Sure. So we have a team of people that go out and do trainings at our schools regarding code of conduct and its implementation. So last spring, in working with the school leaders, instead of having teams of people come out to trainings and leave their schools, we decided to push in the trainings to the schools. So we have a regular cycle of opportunities where we talk to school teams about the policies, about their questions around implementation, and actually kind of check in with them about how they're doing with that implementation. So there's a constant cycle of that, and that training started earlier this fall. And it continues, it's ongoing.
Development. But then, but is there any other mechanism of reporting that happens beyond the principal? Like, is there information or data collected? Because I think, you know, we were all kind of shocked that this was happening, and so how do we know a year from now that it's actually working, just because we put it in writing?
Sure, so we can build the mechanisms to see how we evaluate it and track it. That'll be some more discussions that we can have with our team, but, you know, we can start with that and get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Ms. Robinson, it sounded like you had an additional question.
My question was similar. The question is, how does this information get shared back with parents? We had heard last week in one of a parent's testimony that she had requested that the school withhold recess from a child. And so the question is, you know, we need to make sure that we're all on the same page. Families, school, lunchroom people, whoever may be in that moment having that request or trying to meet that.
Sure. So we have an outreach strategy that we have that includes getting information to families. We use COCAC. Parents are represented on that body as well. So there's a lot of mechanisms that we have and opportunities to reach out to families as well. So we'll double down our efforts, put it on the website, those kind of things.
All right, thank you.
Mr. O'Neill.
So, Mr. DePina, thank you for this. I just want to make sure I'm clear on the clarification that has been added. Are you trying to say that there is no reason to withhold recess for a student except for illness and safety, but the illness and safety excuse has to be approved by a principal?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I'm just not sure if the way it is written is grammatically correct in making that point.
Sure.
And again, I was not an English major, and if there's an English major here or an English teacher here, that would be great. Because it said, and I'm just worried, I'm glancing down at our lawyer, because of how a principal may interpret it or to provide academic support or for any other reason other than illness safety as approved by the principal. I think some principals may actually be confused by that. Are they approving the academic support? Are they, and it just, I know I may be hypercritical here, Mr. Chair, but maybe just potentially changing it to a period after safety and then saying said illness or safety reason to be specifically approved by principal. Something like I'm just not sure. Mr. Chair, you're a lawyer. If you think it's clear, that's fine. I could see how someone may misinterpret it.
I see what you mean, Mr. O'Neill, and I think, maybe perhaps an edit that changes the word as to unless would do the trick here, because I think what we're trying to say here is that, the clear statement that the committee was trying to make was that we don't want recess being taken away as a form of discipline. And that's what we found in the good work and reporting of the Wellness Council was still happening in over 20% of our schools. And so to make clear to our school leaders and our educators in the schools, we wanted this a clear and simple statement that said that recess shall not be taken away.
So could we simply, right after safety, put a period and then simply say, said reason of illness or safety must be specifically approved by principal? I'm just trying to make it really clear so there's no wiggle room here of people thinking. I'm trying to make it clear and understood for our principals.
Mr. DePino, was the feedback from the school superintendents strictly limited, to illness or safety reasons, this other category?
Just for illness and safety, that they want them to be able to prove that revocation of the recess, just for those reasons, yes.
Okay. So I think what we would say is that our guidance is to edit this consistent with what Mr. O'Neill's input is. I think what we want to say is a period after safety, and something to the effect of any exception to this rule.
Well, it's not really an exception, right? We want to make sure that they
they'll
approve.
come up with other
If so, for example, if
Any
a
illness
student
or
is,
safety
if student
exception
is
to be
ill,
approved by
or if there's an issue going on at recess.
An illness
I'm
or
not
safety.
done with my edit.
An
Sorry.
illness, you could just say an illness or safety exception must be approved by the principal.
I'm sorry, say that again.
An illness or safety exception must be approved by the principal.
That
Add
works for
as
me.
a separate, as the last sentence.
Attorney Casilius Esquire, thank you. I think that works. Ms. Sullivan, did you get that statement?
Yes, I did.
You can make that change into the vote that we're going to take in just a moment.
Teamwork with Michael.
Is that satisfactory, Mr. O'Neill?
Yeah, I didn't know.
Yeah.
It seemed unclear to me, and so I got nervous.
I think it's a good catch, and we always aim for clarity, and so I appreciate everybody's input. Fun with editing tonight, huh, folks? Are there further questions or comments? Ms. Reyes?
I just want to quickly express my support for changing this. I think that there are some sort of common sense things like this that are quick changes that involve that quick sort of edit, that quick conversation. And so I appreciate the work that's been done on this. And yeah, I mean, if I had a vote, I would vote yes.
Well, thank you very much, and we appreciate that. Well, if there are no further comments or questions, I will entertain a motion to approve this update to Section 4 of the BPS Code of Conduct as presented with the specific additional amendment that we have just discussed and has been captured by the Executive Secretary. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Sounds like a second from Mr. O'Neill. Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Ms. Sullivan, will you please call the roll?
Dr. Coleman?
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Dr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Robinson?
Yes.
Mr. Tran?
Yes.
Ms. Oliver Davila?
Yes.
Mr. Lecanto?
Yes.
The amended motion passes unanimously.
Well, thank you, Ms. Sullivan. Thank you again, Mr. DePina, for your hard work in getting this in shape so quickly and being so responsive, and to all your colleagues as well. I know Ms. Lazat, again, worked very hard on this as well, and to Assistant Superintendent Carter for bringing this to light in the first place through your presentation on wellness just a few weeks ago. This is really an issue that, particularly any issue around code of conduct strikes a chord with each of us, and we've been very vigilant, and so we appreciate you working with us to make this meaningful impact for students.
You're welcome. Thank you for your leadership on it as well.
Thank you again. Okay, we'll move on now to our first report, which is an update and series of proposals from the Dudley Street Neighborhood Charter School. At this time, I'd like to invite Mr. Jesse Solomon, the Executive Director of the Boston Plan for Excellence, to please step forward with his presentation. I'm sorry, Mr. Solomon, my notes aren't up to date, so you can
Sorry.
introduce your colleague as well.
Yes, this is Hakeem Harris, who's co-chair of the board.
How are you, Mr. Harris? Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Please.
Just launch, yeah.
Sure. There were a couple of items that we needed to make sure were updated and that everybody was on the same page with. The first thing was memorandum of understanding between BPS as well as the DSNCS board as it related to the code of conduct, which is something that was just spoken of, and so we wanted to make sure that we amended our policy so that it was more in line or completely in line with the code of conduct that is applicable for all BPS schools. We also needed to make a change to the enrollment policy. Currently, the enrollment policy is that we take on new students between K1 and second grade. And we wanted to amend that to be able to take in new students from grades 3 through 5 as well. It was important, certainly for us, to make sure that our school is as full as possible. And in being able to do that, we need to be able to make that amendment, which is what we're also presenting. There's also the accountability plan that was part of the 2017 charter renewal, and also the revisement of the MOU between DSNCS and BPE, with BPE being recognized as an education management organization for DSNCS.
Short and sweet? Well, excellent. Mr. Solomon, do you have additional?
Yeah, we have a few more slides, if that's
And I
okay.
apologize, because we usually see the slides down here on this television, but it's not working, so.
Okay.
Please proceed.
You have the, yeah, okay. We'll be brief, I promise. I just wanted to give a quick history of the school, a little bit of update on kind of where we are, and that'll tee this up. So I think everybody knows this, but Dudley Street School was co-founded by the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative and BPE back in 2011. The organizations came together really out of the desire to ultimately form a pre-K to 12 pathway in the neighborhood and provide students and families in the Dudley neighborhood a quality, predictable pathway from the time their kid was 4 to high school graduation and beyond. The school was founded with a 3-part mission: to provide a high-quality education for all students, to serve as a driver of human capital development, and to serve as a partner in improvement of Dudley neighborhood schools. So really trying to think about the whole neighborhood. And from the very beginning of this work, we've tried to think about all the students in the neighborhood and how we ensure that every student in the neighborhood has a seat in a quality school. So just kind of updating where we are. In terms of the 3 parts of the mission, in terms of academics, the students in the school have met the accountability plan goals for attendance, behavior, on-time promotion. Our MCAS scores last year put us in the top 3rd in math and the top half in ELA against sort of the comparison groups of schools in the neighborhood and sort of surrounding zones. Last year, 79% of students made 1 year or more's worth of growth in reading, and 47% made at least 1 1/3 years. And the goal we've set internally, and you'll see that on the accountability plan, is that students on grade level, we aim to make at least a year's worth of growth, but students who are behind grade level need to make more, obviously, if they're going to catch up. And so that's why we measure both metrics. The school does have an intervention block. So part of the idea of having, this meshes with the teacher preparation component, is the school serves to prepare teachers who will teach in Boston afterwards. And so there's basically an extra adult in every class. And so during the encore block, the idea is all the adults in the school take a small group of students, and that's a way of doing kind of intervention and remediation. In terms of the sort of second two components, the second mission element is preparing and supporting Boston teachers. The Boston Public Schools and Boston Plan for Excellence co-founded Boston Teacher Residency 2002. Since then, together, we've prepared over 700 teachers who teach in Boston. Over half of those folks are folks of color. Over half of the secondary teachers teach in STEM fields, and roughly 1/3 of the grads teach in either special education or ESL positions. In the schools, as I was saying, BTR residents deliver personalized and differentiated instruction, really used to make sure that students are getting more attention during the day. And then we also bring in 3 instructional coaches who support all teachers across the school. And then in terms of the third element, which is really thinking about the whole Dudley community, since we've started, we've worked collaboratively with neighborhood community organizations, DSNI, Project Hope, the Food Project, Children's Hospital, et cetera, to improve educational opportunities in Dudley. Over the last 4 years, about 1,500 students have entered the lottery for open seats. We have pretty much universal turnout for literacy and math family nights. And we're in the process, you'll hear about this in a second, of organizing a set of events for the Pathway schools. So there are 4 feeder schools that feed into the Dearborn, the Winthrop, the Mason, the Ellis, and Dudley Street. And so we've really tried to think of those as a group. And Hakeem will talk a little more to that now.
Yeah, so I grew up right on Dudley Street. It literally was walking distance from where the school is now. And so for the past 25 years, off and on, I've lived there. So I recognize the need for there to be a definitive pathway from kids that are 3-4 years old all the way through adulthood. There's a lot of talent in that neighborhood. And unfortunately, a lot of talent ends up going away from that neighborhood, I being one of those kids. I went to the English high school, proud graduate, but that's in Jamaica Plain, which it's a fine school, but I didn't have that same foundation in the neighborhood. The neighborhood didn't mean as much to me because I wasn't there as much. My daughter, on the other hand, started at DSNCS when it started in 2011. And she taught me about a neighborhood that I had lived in at that point for decades. And although I was immensely, immensely proud that she had that connection and had that understanding of the neighborhood, it actually made me feel a little embarrassed that I didn't know as much about a neighborhood that I grew up in. So the fact that these 4 feeder schools feed into such an academy as Dearborn, it really means a lot. It means a lot for the community. It means a lot for parents, not having to go through the lottery system or trying to figure out where you're going to send your child, because you know full well that you can go from what is a foundational, excellent elementary school to an excellent middle school and excellent high school. And that's actually reflected in the numbers. If you take a look at the slide that's up now, 2/3 of the students that are in Dearborn come from those 4 feeder schools. And more parents are choosing to send their kids directly from these 4 feeder schools into the Dearborn. So it's really important for us to make sure that that pathway is not just firmly established, but it stays there, because students that do well and excel there, they end up staying and doing well and excelling in those neighborhoods. And the demographic of that neighborhood is changing quite a bit, as I'm sure you guys are well aware. And making sure that that foundational and community aspects are still in that neighborhood is paramount. And so to that, again, with the 4 changes that we've talked about, making sure that our school is in line with BPS, making sure that we are allowed to bring in more students so that we can continue to see that pathway grow. Those are certainly important aspects, as well as making sure that there is a very clear distinction between the board and what goes on in the school, as well as what BPE, the services that are provided.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Harris, and thank you, Mr. Sullivan. I will open it up to members for questions and discussion. Dr. Coleman, we'll start with you.
Hey, how you doing? Very good to see you, Jesse. It's been too long, Jesse. So.
Has been.
Great, wonderful work, having watched it evolve and grown over the past decade. This is very exciting work. So my questions are, assuming I'm going to vote yes, so that's not even an issue here. Really about one of the questions I think that's facing us as a district. So you have a focused and educational model, both for the students who are coming through your system and the new teachers you're training, and I assume then the teachers that you have as kind of both the mentors and the direct classroom instructions that you've created, and you monitor, and you maintain a fair level of high quality control in that on those processes. Is that a fair assumption to make?
We are working to do that, yes. It's every day.
Do you see your model as replicable? How much of it is driven by, the time and energy you put into it, the selection of the great teachers you have, the community you've built, and that kind of commitment to this institution clearly has an impact, and we see that all the time. The question facing us, I think, broadly is, can we take this, a beacon of excellence and think about how to replicate this program in other geographic contexts within the city that faces the same type of opportunities that I'm bad at names, so I'll say our friend articulated.
Mr. Harris, yeah.
Mr.
Hakeem,
Harris.
Yeah. I guess if I make sure I get the question right, but I think I would say there are important elements that are replicable, and then each community is going to think about this themselves. And I know, for example, Grove Hall is thinking about how to align schools, so I don't think we're the only community doing this. I think 3 things that I think about that have made a big difference so far that I think have been important. One is when we started this, having a full year with DS&I to have a community process in which potential families, some of whose students didn't get in because of the lottery, community partners come together to talk about what kind of school they'd want to see and what kind of pathway. So it felt like the school wasn't plopped down. It felt like it came out of a conversation that had been going on in the neighborhood for a while, and it was able to think about how we might try to meet the hopes and dreams of a neighborhood and of a set of conversations. So that feels like something that's replicable. I think the second part is I think if you're asking about this part, the placement of these pre-service teachers, these residents in a school. I think, I do think that's replicable. I think I would advocate, maybe not for all, but I think the residency model where residents spend a full year in a school feels really important. When we started it with BPS in 2002, at the time, Superintendent Payson felt very strongly that although there were lots of teacher prep programs, most of those folks weren't really prepared for or committed to Boston, and so the way we decided to do this really to have folks spend a year in Boston. So I could imagine other schools across the city really serving as homes for cohorts of teachers and making really close partnerships with schools of education. I know there are other models like that. And then I guess the last thing I'd say that's replicable is, and this is actually ties to the enrollment policy, which is, I'm telling you what you already know, so I apologize, but I think one of the things we see often, right, is a family might come in and be happy with the school, but in 3rd grade they'll start looking around, right? And like, do I move my kid in 4th grade to get to advanced work? Or in 5th grade, do I switch to a charter, right? So I might be making a decision for a 3rd grade student that's actually about what are my options in 6th grade. And so for us to be able to say, hey, if you're a family that comes to this pathway, you can see a path all the way through, right? And so you have a parent of a 5th grader whose kid loves robotics and knows if they go to Dearborn, they're going to get to do robotics there. So there's a reason to stay in that pathway because it becomes a predictable pathway all the way through, 18, end of high school. So I think all those things, I don't know, I hope I'm getting at your question. I think all those things are replicable.
So, if I may, one more question, and then we can go deeper off record. BPE, from the beginning, was a powerful, active agent in the creation of this pathway. And how dependent on the district's ability to replicate would be needing to partner with another independent education organization that has its own agenda, that a good agenda is going to be, I don't mean it in any negative way, but that has kind of the autonomy of the district to be able to set their own agenda. And you're in your 6th superintendent, 6, 7, yeah. And so how central is that, or is it something that we could potentially replicate that kind of leadership targeted around this complex over a decade period of time?
Probably, I should be political in my answer, so I'm going to pause for a second and hem and haw as you ask me that question.
We're friends here.
Yeah.
You want to yield your time?
Yeah, exactly, to my next. I guess I think a couple things. One is you could imagine, I think, as the district and the school committee sets a path for the next 5 or 10 years, that within that is sort of laid out a general structure, and that there are roles for partners in that structure. And I think one of the great things about Boston is just the set of resources and partners. And as I think you sort of alluded to, if we have 200 partners all doing their own thing, not good for anyone. So is there a way to kind of convene around a couple strategic goals and do that in a way where we're clear about what can a partner do better and what should the district do better? And I think that's the conversation, when it's gone well, that has led to the kind of strongest partnerships.
Sorry, you said something great. Another question. I apologize, and my impulse control is limited this time of night. This is a decade's work. This is not something you do in less than a decade as well, right? At this point, I mean, I don't want to say that because we're so urgent, we're so impatient, we want to get going, but you're kind of a model in my mind of what thorough, thoughtful planning, as you say, take a year to get going, and staying on task over time creates. Not something that's easily replicated in 2 years.
I think that's right, and I think as we're getting more into it, as we've had grads now off into their freshman, sophomore, and junior years, and we're starting to follow them along, we realize that the work is not done at 18 either. So there's another 5 or 6 years until we get them into jobs at family-sustaining wages. That's part of this too.
Thank you so much for your service to the Boston kids.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman. Ms. Robinson.
Thanks. I'd like to know a little bit about the relationships with the other schools in the neighborhood in terms of the feeder patterns that to everybody going to Dearborn, but also what would be the, would there be any issue if you now are deciding to increase your 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade? How many seats are you talking about, and does that put pressure on other schools in the neighborhood as well?
Yeah, so I'd say the formal relationships are just starting. Next week, for example, one of the things we've tried to do is start to have all the feeder schools, the 5th grades, teachers, parents, and families come up, meet the 6th graders, see the school, and start this sort of transition, right? Because we have this, if you know that 3/4 of your kids are coming from these 4 schools, there's no excuse to not know who those kids are and what they need and that kind of thing. So those kinds of things are starting. I think the next step in that is some collaboration around some early STEM activities, and sort of, opening up the Dearborn as a place to have summer STEM camp and drone camp and stuff. So that's all starting. We're starting mostly with the feeder pattern and the connection of the sort of teachers and parents across grades. The 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, I should have said this at the beginning. First of all, that was a mistake on our part in the beginning not to include that in the enrollment policy. We thought, not knowing, that we wanted to send the message to everyone, like, get in early, stay the whole year, and then we noticed, like, oh gosh, like I said, kids are going to advanced work, or kids are moving, right? We found that there's pressures on housing. I mean, the neighborhood is rapidly gentrifying, and so you've got kids going to Brockton and Attleboro and all different kinds of places. So we should have done that differently. I don't see it as a huge pressure on the schools in the neighborhood. There's probably a handful of seats at each grade at this point, and that would be smaller if we did this. For the most part, when we're seeing kids that are thinking about coming in, sometimes it's because a younger student got in and it's a sibling and a family wants to have one drop off, but they're like, oh, my kindergarten kid got in, but my fourth grader can't go, so that's a problem. Sometimes it's students moving, they're moving from one neighborhood to another, so they want to be at a place closer to home. Sometimes we've had emergency transfers that we haven't been able to take. So those have felt like the big areas. We haven't seen almost no transferring that I can think of from the schools in the neighborhood. So, is that what you were?
Right.
Yeah.
And is the transfer process to go to your school different than it would be if a parent was requesting this anywhere else in the district? That's what I don't understand is does any student that wants to transfer in have to come doesn't they have to come directly through here, enrollment, before they get placed?
I think I
That's a
can.
good question. I don't know yet.
So there's because it's a Horace Mann, there's a lottery. But if a student comes, walks in tomorrow, there's a wait list that their name gets put on. So if there are 20 kids on the wait list, they would go at the end of the wait list. But if there's no one on the wait list, so they come directly to the school. They also do go to the Welcome Center. They do both. But, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Ms. Reyes.
Hi. I was looking over the enrollment policy, and I noticed that on page 3 it said that the application would be translated into the city's 5 major languages. And I was wondering if that could somehow be aligned with BPS, because I know that we identify 9 languages as sort of the big ones that things are translated into, and especially considering that 32.8% of your students are classified as speaking a first language other than English. I think that would be really helpful for parents, especially ones who might not have considered this as an opportunity for their student.
That's great. We will make that change. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Reyes.
Good catch.
Yeah.
O'Neill.
Do you need a job?
Mr. Solomon, I suppose you're not surprised that our student rep again came up with the most salient point of the evening. I just have to build on particularly what Dr. Coleman was saying, because I look at this and I immediately think back to, Dr. Johnson unfortunately having to recommend the closing of a number of schools, and our former colleague, John Barrows, who's now Chief of Economic Development for the city, but at the time ran the Dudley Square Neighborhood Initiative, and had to take the difficult vote to close the King School for a variety of reasons, but then work with Dr. Johnson to start this school up, and then a few years later, and convincing BPE, who had been a long-term, how long has BPE been a partner of the district? 30,
84, yeah. Since 1984.
Okay,
So, yeah,
it's 1984,
years, yeah.
right. So long-term partner on a variety of things, and convincing BPE to move from helping us with teachers and a bunch of things to actually stepping forward to running a school. And boy, what a groundbreaking, crazy idea it was at the time. And then a few years later, when we were really struggling with the Dearborn, and it was in a beat-up old building, we didn't know whether we were going to rebuild it, the school was struggling, parents weren't choosing it, we were debating what to do, and Superintendent McDonough at the time talking with you, and BPE stepping up again, and then having some challenges in the neighborhood to accept that and working to shift it to making, and I'm being very diplomatic, aren't I?
Yes, you are.
Those were some fun meetings. But getting to a point that the neighborhood embraced it and believing that we were going to actually build that building, which is now our finest building in the city of Boston, hands down, and the first STEM custom design building in New England, I believe, right? And so, again, building off of what Dean Coleman said, Dr. Coleman said, and there's a reason for me doing a little bit of Old Town history today, because the partnership with BPE has been phenomenal. And when I think through our partners, and yes, I agree with you, Dr. Coleman, we are challenged sometimes in our partnerships, and we're a difficult place to partner with. But the partnership with BPE, the partnership with City Year, because I see Sandra sitting here tonight, the partnership with Edvestors, these are long-term partners with us that we have gone to with challenges. And you have all said, how can we work with you to solve your problems? So I have deep appreciation for the work that you have done, both at this school, and I'm delighted to see the results, and the Dearborn, where it's going, some of the great things that are happening now that you're in the building, excited to get out. Thank you for the invitation to get out and see it. And even to the point where you have proactively said to us, we're going by the code of conduct. You know, the things that we're doing. I'm sure you're aware of the recess policy we voted on today. I have no doubt that you're going to say, of course, we're going to agree to that as well. So thank you for the partnership. It has been important for the city and important for this district.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I echo all of these sentiments. I remember when the Dearborn was opening and all of those meetings. So I also want to thank you, and I want to thank you for coming and really talking about the neighborhood piece. My daughter was at a charter school, and she's now a BPS. And although I love that charter school, part of the biggest challenge was not being in a neighborhood with other children that we could be close to and play with. And she's just such a happy soul now. I think it's so important for young people to know other kids in their neighborhood. When I was growing up, you know, you went down the street and you knew everybody and you played outside, and now, you know, that's changed. So I really appreciate you for coming and talking about that. There's so many assets in our neighborhoods, and many of our children don't know because they spend most of their time going into another neighborhood. I want to say thank you to the Bar Foundation too, because I know that John and you talked about this when we were on bar trips. Many great collaborations have happened because of the Bar Fellowship and the fellows coming together. So yay, keep going, Bar, on the Bar Fellows. And I really appreciate the thoughtfulness of all of this. I have to repeat what you said just because I think it's so important that when we create things, it has to come from the community level. And so bringing the community together to have a conversation, to envision the school is so important. It can't be that we, you know, put something down that we think this is going to work. So thank you for taking the time. I know it's not always easy, and, you know, sometimes, you know, we can have different opinions, but at the end of the day, it's about airing those opinions and really coming together with a plan. I think the other thing that I really appreciate about the model is the strategic partnerships. You know, you don't have like 1 million partnerships here. It's what are the partnerships that are in the neighborhood too, because you have all of these, you know, the food project, Project Hope, all in the neighborhood, and then the Children's Hospital, like what are meeting the needs of the student. And so really, what is the student experience? The other piece, I have so many great things to say, so sorry. The Dearborn, what a beautiful space, what a beautiful school. Seeing so many English language learner students, and we know that STEM really works in terms of English language development. It's a great space. I only have one question, which is you have 95% families come out. And so we hear all the time about how families aren't engaged. So if you can talk a little bit, what is it that you do? Like, what is your secret sauce that you have 95% of families coming out on these nights? So please teach us something, partner with us, help us to figure out, how do we do that?
No pressure though, right?
Yeah. Yes, well, first I should say, obviously, it is not me.
Right,
but,
your
but
team.
yes.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know if it's a secret sauce. I think one of the things I'm impressed by, and I think this is true at a lot of schools, teachers are very, very close with the families of the students in their classroom. That's where most of the communication happens. And those family math and literacy nights are based around students' work and around doing math and doing activities with kids. So people like them, you know, because I get to see my kid perform and I get to see my kids work, and then we do some math together, we play a game, we get some pizza, and people have fun when they come out and they feel involved. There's not a lot of talking to. I think it's
more like
it's working with, yeah.
And it's also the kids themselves. They are so excited about these nights, and I know, just being a parent, if my daughter comes and says, "Hey, I've got this great thing going on at school. I really want you to be there." You make the time to be there, you know, even though you might have a million other things going on, just to make sure that you continue to foster that excitement. And these kids get amped for these math nights and these literacy nights. And you can even see it as these nights come closer. There's a certain energy and excitement that's in the building just because the kids love it. It starts to feed into the teachers. They love it. And so that excitement goes home with them. And then they bring their parents, and that excitement, then it just continues. And so it almost feeds on itself. And so then parents start to look forward to the next one because they know it's going to happen either the next semester or the next year. And once you establish that culture, that education not only is important, but it's exciting and it's engaging, it really begins to, like I said, it feeds on itself. And so we've been fortunate in that we've had good leadership. We've had the fact that you have two adults in the room makes such a huge difference, because not only are you talking about the instruction from a more seasoned teacher, but now you're talking about the excitement of the energy that comes with somebody that's trying something brand new and a new teacher. And so the kids feed off of that as well. So I think it's both the structure that's in place as well as the leadership that's in place that makes it so exciting and so attractive. It's actually, as a parent, part of the reason why I wanted to send my child there is, so there's two adults in the room. That's perfect, because now I know that my child is going to get more of an individualized and customized teaching and learning experience.
Great, thank you. And thank you so much for adopting the code of conduct. And that's all I have. Thank you for all your work. And thank you for coming out and being away from your family to talk with us.
Oh, my
and
pleasure.
You too, Jesse. I know you have a family.
Thank you, gentlemen, Mr. Solomon and Mr. Harris, for being here tonight and presenting this. You came to us in 2017 with an update to your charter, and this is an update to that update based on a few edits that you've talked to us about tonight, as well as a few additional changes that Jesse's asked you to do. So I don't think we have a lot of heavy lifting here, and I think we've, through all of my colleagues, we've explored a great deal about what your school does and what this K-12 pathway that you're part of is doing for the neighborhood that the school is found within. So I don't have anything further to add, and I don't want to belabor the night. I know you do have families, and so do we. But we really appreciate you coming out and giving us this presentation and being so willing to answer our questions. And we'll look forward on December 4th to taking action on these charter amendments.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you again. Have a good night.
Thank you.
So we'll move on now to our final report, which is a Build BPS update. At this time, I'd like to invite the following people to please step forward with their presentation. Ms. Monica Roberts, our Chief of Student, Family, and Community Advancement, our Chief Operating Officer, John Hanlon, and our, strike that interim piece, Chief Financial Officer, Nathan Cooter, to please join us at the podium. As they are gathering and joining us for the presentation, for folks that are watching this at home and some that are still with us in the audience this evening, the presenters are going to be talking a little bit about what was announced last week with respect to an acceleration in many respects of the presentation on K-6 expansions that we heard in May from Interim Superintendent Perrill and a number of the members of the team that's presenting here tonight. So we're looking very much forward to hearing much more about what these plans are and the underlying reasons for why the district's been able to accelerate these plans. Bless you. And we'll look forward to having a number of questions for you as the presentation makes its way through. And the superintendent looks like you want to do a little bit of an intro.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. I just want to commend the team that we have Build PPS, and we've added a couple of project managers as well to this work to really do a good job, and they're going to be able to outline today why we made some of these recommendations and changes and accelerations, and our commitment to the reconfiguration. So I want to hand it over to Nate, Monica, and John, and I just want to thank my team for their incredible hard work.
Good evening, and thank you for having us. I'm Monica Roberts. I'm the Chief of Student, Family, and Community Advancement, and we're excited to talk with you about our update on Bill BPS. So just as a reminder of what we came and spoke to this committee about, I believe last May now, at the end of last school year, was about our work in reducing the configurations. So as we started the Bill BPS process, we had, I believe, a little over 20 configurations in terms of our school mapping. And what we really wanted to do is to drive towards fewer configurations, primarily K6, 7, 12, and K8, 9, 12. And so on slide 3, when we came before this committee, we talked about that as one of the goals in our Bill BPS report, how we might get there, the fact that we are in reducing our transitions for students and families. We believe that it would have positive impacts in terms of what the research says about the academic outcomes for students as well as others, particularly as they move multiple times from school to school. So when we met last year, we talked about moving 11 schools forward for the fall of 2020. There were 5 schools that are feeders into the McCormick, which we also took a vote on, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So there were 5 schools that we were talking about moving to K6 that were feeding into McCormick, and then 5 schools that we called citywide, so they were dispersed across the city, who we also had done some assessment around and determined that they could go K6. As a second phase of that work for fall 2021, we had talked about moving the East Boston elementary schools forward as K6 schools, as we sought to also phase out and reconfigure the Edwards Middle School. As you all know, as we went into this work, the superintendent, Caselius, asked us to take time for her to really delve into what we had developed, to talk to the community a little bit more, hear from school leaders, all of our stakeholders, and she did do that work. One of the things that we've consistently heard as she's done, I think, 120 school visits at this point and several meetings, is that folks are really interested in accelerating, particularly the K6 work. This has a lot to do with people wanting to understand what their pathway is, having some sense of clarity around where their child is going to go through elementary school. And so that community feedback had led her to ask us about assessing whether there was a possibility of accelerating the K6 work. One of the things that has led to, that we looked at in our assessment, is the physical capacity of schools to actually do this. In the case of the East Boston schools, which we'll talk about, we have found that they have the physical capacity now to move faster than we initially thought they might be able to. And then particularly in the case of East Boston, in all of the schools we looked at equity, but in the case of East Boston, they serve a higher proportion of Hispanic and English learner students. So today, what we are going over is what our new plan looks like. We would like to continue with the schools that were what we were calling citywide schools. There are 6 of them: the Harvard-Kent, Hale, Manning, Channing, Conley, and Kinney. We will add to that the Mattahunt. So it's the Mattahunt we had already talked about as a K6 school, but we are flagging it here as we will continue to share with our community that we do intend to move forward with the Mattahunt going to K6. I believe next year they'll be going a 4th grade. But as we're talking about K6 across the city, we have heard that it's important for us also to message about the Mattahunt, so we intend to do that as well. Then you have the schools that are feeding into the McCormick. There are 5 schools that will add a 6th grade next year: to Clapp, Dever, Everett, Perkins, and Tynan. And the Perry K8 is the one K8 school that will start to move towards a K6 model. So next year they will have K through 6 in grade 8. So their rising 7th graders will graduate from the school. They have about 12 rising 7th graders who will transition into our lottery process. The McCormick for next year, as a result of these additional schools taking on a 6th grade, would not take a 6th grade on for next year, as they would have generally fed into that school. And so they will have a 7th and 8th grade for next school year. We also are recommending spending additional time between the McCormick and BCLA communities on planning and design to align that process with our district process for high school redesign, which will include looking at the mass core. So we've been talking with those school communities, and will allow us also to think about the needs of the endeavor and how we might incorporate that into our planning. Next on slide 8, we will be looking at the East Boston schools. This is the set of schools that we're looking to accelerate a year earlier. So next fall, these schools would also take on a 6th grade. They are the Adams, Bradley, Gould, Kennedy, O'Donnell, and Otis. And so we, as a part of our facilities assessment, again, we determined that they are able to move faster. It was a community-wide conversation about how about moving those schools forward as we talked to the East Boston and Charlestown communities and found a lot of support for that as well. As a result, the Edwards would not take on a 6th grade because many of the East Boston schools are feeders into the Edwards, and so we would not have them take on a 6th grade next year. They would have a 7th and 8th grade. For both the Edwards and the McCormick, because they will only have 7th and 8th grade, we'll be providing sustainability budget, which we can talk about additionally if you have questions. That will ensure that the level of programming that they're receiving will be consistent. The Edwards would then, is proposed to close at the end of the 21-22 school year. The superintendent and our team would be working with the community to talk about the future of that building in terms of how it might be part of the reconfiguration efforts in terms of our K-6, 7-12, K-8, 9-12 landscape. And lastly, the Jackson Man is not necessarily it's staying on the same timeline. Our plan is to continue looking for a space for the 2 schools. We've been meeting with those 2 school communities. We'll continue to do so. Our hope is to move them into a new space for the 21-22 school year. So we are aggressively looking for space. The facilities team has been doing a great job partnering with the city around that. Again, we know it's really important that as we are holding this and those 2 school communities are waiting to determine where they go, that we continue to meet with them. So we'll continue to partner with them in that work. And lastly, slide 10 reflects the shift, the changes, a map of the changes that would be reflected for next school year in terms of the K-6 expansion and where we're starting to reconfigure middle schools with the Edwards and the McCormick. And that is it.
All right. Well, thank you, Monica, for that very brief presentation, and to Nate and John as well. We'll open it up now to members for questions and discussion. We'll start with our student rep, Ms. Reyes.
I have one comment for now, and that would be that as the district is looking for space for the Jackson Man, I think that it is crucial to make sure that it stays somewhere in the Austin-Brighton area, hopefully close to where it is now, because that's an area that is tough to, it's tough to get out to the rest of Boston from that area and then into that area as well. So I think that it would be best for the community there to keep those schools as close as possible to them. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Reyes. Dr. Rivera.
Yeah, so I actually had questions I don't know if you have the answers to, but I, at the English Learners Task Force meeting recently this week, a couple of teachers expressed concern about what will happen with teachers, for example, that have a K-5 license and that are going to be now in a K-6, and whether, some of these teachers may lose their jobs, what's going to happen with the licensure of having those who don't have a K-6 license. And I'm just curious if you've considered some of these concerns around, I guess it's the human capital issues of the staffing that might change in those schools in East Boston.
Yes, Member Rivera, we will be working with the BTU on the staffing issues, and our Chief of Human Capital, Al Taylor, has already met with Labor Relations and the President of the BTU, and we're continuing those conversations now.
So is there still the possibility, though, that some teachers may be losing their jobs?
Well, I think that Dr. Rivera, I think what will happen is when you have a K-5 going to K-6, you'll be adding staff. You'll be adding a 6th grade. So what I think it is more around is an assignment of classes, and whether they would be assigned to 6th grade. You can't be assigned outside your licensure, I don't believe, in Massachusetts. So I believe we would have to work with those staffing profiles. And so we can come back to you with more information after we have those agreements and with our union.
Okay, yeah, and then again, related to the staffing, right, that these schools, again, focused on East Boston for now, are gonna be many English learners, and so just trying to also get an understanding of the qualifications then of the teachers in those schools and whether they'll have that additional training, retell, what it takes to, work with the English learners that will be so concentrated in those schools.
Absolutely.
Also, I'm curious if you've also considered whether this is gonna impact our transportation in some way. The Globe has been doing a series on transportation, and will this actually alleviate perhaps congestion now that, at least in East Boston, have you considered the busing and, advantages, disadvantages there?
We believe that there's likely to be some very small advantages, but only very small. Over time, that they have the potential to become larger as more schools across the district become K-6, 7, 12, or K-8, 9, 12, and as middle schools are phased out. The reason being that in all cases with middle schools, we're obligated to transport all general education 6th graders, and then for 6th, 7th, and 8th, any with special accommodations via special education or 504 plans. So for example, with the Edwards shifting to a 7 and 8 next year rather than 6, 7, and 8, there could be some small cost savings there, because there might be 1 or 2 buses we might not need to send to the Edwards, whereas we're already sending buses to all the East Boston schools that are typically feeding students to the Edwards. So we wouldn't likely be adding more buses to the East Boston schools, but potentially taking 1 or 2 away from the Edwards, just because they wouldn't have that demand for 6th grade.
Okay. Sorry, just one more question. So it's about the Edwards School. What is the reaction there? Feelings of the morale of the staff, in terms of not taking on a 6th grade?
So, because we had talked about the Edwards reconfiguring previously, I don't think it wasn't a surprise, and we had been talking with the school community. I think the primary thing that we need to do is be able to answer a lot of questions you asked about staffing. The staff, to their credit, really wanted to make sure that there was a good plan for students. All of the students, in terms of English learners and special education, and what care we'd be providing and support to the elementary schools that would be going to 6th grade. Then also thinking about how they supported the 7th and 8th graders in that space, and making sure that they had what they needed and that this would not negatively impact outcomes for students there as well. So the staff are very concerned about students, and I think secondarily thinking about what does this mean for them long term. But very committed to staying there and supporting their community.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rivera. Ms. Robinson.
Yes, thank you. I guess one of my major questions is what happens in 21, 22, and where are all the 7th grades? So if we've got all of these schools going K to 6, will we have enough schools going to 7 to 12 so that there won't be a hiccup in terms of these kids moving into schools that are ready to take them through that next 6-year plan?
So as part of this process, what we'll be doing is kicking off our 7-12 team that will be really designing what does our high school experience look like, integrating our mass core work into that. And we will be speaking with school leaders about coming on as 7-12s in 21-22. We do have schools that are very interested in doing it for that school year. So we believe we'll at least be able to bring on 2, if not more, to accommodate the K-6.
So hopefully they would be in the same areas where these schools are feeding into, so like the to have a smooth things. So the Russell is not expanding to grade 6. So where will the students that are where would those kids go? Would they just get absorbed into the other schools that are grade 6? So the 5th graders from the Russell, where will they go next year?
So families will obviously have a choice. I think we're exploring different potential new feeder patterns for a couple of schools, including the Russell, to look at one of the other schools with a 6th grade in it. That was part of the conversation we had with the Russell community around their options for K-6 when we started the conversation around the McCormick. But they, with our student assignment plan, we will be planning to have the feeder patterns so families know where their sort of default option is, and then of course they'll have the choice of either any of the K-6, K-8s, or 6-12s that are in the area for them to be able to enroll in.
And to Dr. Rivera's point around staff, how are current 6th grade teachers being encouraged or supported to look at all of these new developing 6th grades in other schools? I don't know how the licensure goes, whether you've got a 6, 7, 8, so that you would be pigeonholing yourself only to go to a school where you only could teach 6th grade versus if you're in a middle school, you've got that range, and how people are thinking or feeling about those potential shifts.
I think a lot of that will, so as we are talking with our union partners, a lot of how our staff are guided will depend on what is determined around the 6th grade and what we need for licensure. So I don't think anyone's getting advice at this moment. I think what we're going to focus on is ensuring we understand what sort of licensure they'll need and what programming will look like so we can give them the best advice. And then along with that, as our Office of Human Capital has always done really well, provide supports for the transition.
Yeah. My last question is about the equity impact statement with regard to the Edwards in the lines that say, however, deciding not to admit a 6th grade class will likely have negative impacts on the overall learning experience of rising 7th and 8th grade students by affecting the climate of the school, such as decreased student and staff morale. So my question is, what can we do to mitigate that? Because there'll be 2 classes, 7th and 8th grade, and then that last year, just in 8th grade. How are we going to make sure that the morale stays high and people don't see this as, last man out, something to that effect?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that probably needs to be done, both in terms of staff morale and sort of culture that is not financially related. It's about school leadership and about the supports that we can provide through, for instance, with staff planning, reducing some of the anxiety over licensure issues and working with the union will help reduce the sort of anxiety and let them not worry about their next year's job, so they can focus on the kids that are in front of them. They can focus on what they want to focus on, which is teaching. From a financial perspective, one of the things that we're going to be doing is working very closely with the school leaders at the Edwards and the McCormick to ensure that we can maintain the same level of programming, meaning that if they can afford to have a particular bunch of course offerings, that they can continue to offer those, even if it's not supported within weighted student funding with the sort of traditional enrollment declines. We know that schools going through significant enrollment declines often face that disruption and anxiety that comes with the staff. We're going to work with them very early in the budget process to ensure that they can continue to have the same social emotional supports, guidance supports, curricular offerings that they have now. And I think that will be a big part of it, so they don't feel like this is a 50% of what they offered last year. I think what we anticipate is having some of the 6th grade teachers who are no longer doing core classes, not in the building anymore, is there's no way to avoid that having some impact on staff morale and just the school seeing it. I think the intention is for us to have a clearer pathway for the 7-12s, as Monica mentioned, around the planning, so that this is not a announcement of a multi-year phase out necessarily, that we have a clearer path forward for all of the students and families, so that it's not multiple years of them wondering, where will I be in 8th grade, or where will I be in 10th grade, or where will I be in 12th grade, that we have those paths laid out for them in short order, that this isn't something that will be announced in the spring of next year, or a year from now. It'll be coming soon.
Ms. Robinson, I just want to assure you and the school committee members here that the high school team has been working with our high school principals for a couple months now, and we've been talking about the acceleration of the pathways for the K-6 and the 7-12 because we had prioritized that, so we are hoping to be able to announce some of those in the next announcements that we have shortly. So we're just finishing up our community conversations, having engaged with the schools themselves around that and what it's actually going to cost and what that's going to look like. And then our agreements with the BTU, we want to make sure we have those things laid out before we announce the next round.
My last question is about the delaying of the McCormick by a year. What will happen with kids who are either expecting to move over to the McCormick in that next year in terms of that delay?
So,
go ahead.
So what we're planning is over the course of this year and next year is really to have the McCormick and BCLA partnering together to do their design work and to identify kind of what space they would be able to move into, I believe. So I think the community's actually appreciated having the longer time frame to do some thoughtful planning and to make sure that it will be aligned with the district high school planning process. So that was, I think, good news for us and for them.
I guess my concern more is about students who may have thought they were going to move into that new school that next year, but now where were they going to be? A year delayed.
So when we talked about, I think when we presented last year, and I think it's still the thinking that any rising 8th graders would probably get a priority into BCLA. We couldn't guarantee seats, but I think that is still our thinking about how we would handle the McCormick 8th grade students who would be rising in the future years to go into 9th grade.
Ms. Robinson, I've also been meeting with the McCormick and the BCLA teachers and community, and we just had another meeting last Friday, and we'll be meeting again after Thanksgiving to begin this work of planning and design. The reason that the McCormick and BCLA was like my biggest concern was because I was concerned also about the Dever, quite honestly. And I'm hoping to be able to do some revisioning with the community there around K-16. UMass is such a great partner with the community right there. They've told me they have an interest in this K-16 idea. And so I'm just now working through some of that because it's involved with the state. And then, we have the review coming. And so I think I don't want to get the cart in front of the horse without talking to the state and with the whole review and what we're going to do. And so I think this extra year is going to give us the time to be really thoughtful about that school and about what we propose. And it will be a proposal from the community and from our partners. And so I think it'll be really something quite remarkable.
Thank you.
It gets at your urgency question about the schools that keep landing on that list, right? So.
Thank you, Superintendent. Dr. Coleman.
Great, thank you. And I first want to start off by saying how increasingly coherent the Bill PS conversations are becoming, and I really appreciate that because there was a lot of not quite sure where we're going, and this was really, really wonderfully clear about what the issues we're facing. So I want to thank you for the hard work that's taken. So I just have a clarifying question, just to make sure that I'm right, because it's always been a little bit confusing for me. So we start out this conversation about grade configuration. We have too many grade configurations, and so we're moving to this this division of K-6, 7, 12. That also includes creating pathways. I just want to make very clear that the goal is to say that someone's going to come in the lottery once, and they'll have the pathway as much as possible to 6, and then they'll go into another lottery, 7 to 12. They may not be in the same building all the time, but they'll be in a pathway, and that is what we're working for. I just want to be really, I think I missed that clarity that was stated. I just want to be sure.
Yeah, the only thing I would just add to that is the dual pathways of the K-6, 7, 12, and K-8, 9 to 12, that the families will only have to enter the lottery at those 2 points or choose at those 2 points. So it's that single transition point for them in the pathway, and that this is the move to put a lot more families in a position to only have to do that one transition.
Great.
Mr. Coleman, I'd also like to add that we're hoping that these will be programmatic pathways as well. So if you start orchestra as in elementary school, you can continue through high school. If you are in a STEM-based program and science-based program like the Dearborn and the Dudley, that they focus on the math and science, or if you're doing International Baccalaureate like at the Lower Quincy School and the Upper Quincy School, that there's a sure pathway for them to continue and get their diploma program. So I think that it's also that parents are assured not only by grade configuration, but from the programmatic elements that they're choosing. So it's hopefully you'll see more coherence that way as well.
And then I just want to be clear, I heard you say that the 7th graders in the Perry will then go into the lottery. Can you?
The rising 7th graders.
The rising 7th graders, as if they're which would be a natural process, what we're going to for, in the future, that's going to be a common 7th grade experience. So there's no feeling that they're going to feel pinched by our changes, and that they may want something, deserve something more than just the lottery. You see what I'm saying? That it's always a.
So the school leader has been working with those families. Our office is going to be having conversations with those families. We did send a letter out, and we'll start to engage them around the school selection process and school choice process. We, because of the work that the school leader has been doing, we have not heard anything negative from families. But of course, we know that throughout the process, we need to be making sure that we're checking in and providing support.
And then just following up on Ms. Reyes' comments about the isolation of the Austin-Brighton period of time, I just want to remind everyone there's this beautiful stretch of land behind the old Braves Field in Starl Drive that has nothing on it right now, and I'm encouraging eminent domain capture by the city and putting a great K-8. I know there'll be a lot of university resources right there to help you.
What piece of land is that? Mark that down. Show that to me now.
It's right behind BU to Starl Drive. They flattened it out. That has to be owned by Harvard, so
Right.
don't worry about
That's
it.
why the BU guys.
Those are just
We're going to
details.
see the superintendent out there with the.
Also has,
If you tell me there's a
Who's
lot of
asking for more
land.
pilot money the other day?
also hasn't been called Braves Field in 35 years, but that's okay.
That's right.
Coleman.
I was showing my
Nickerson
history.
Field.
I was showing my understanding of history.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman. You are a doctor of history, correct?
No. I am a doctor.
Mr. O'Neill.
Dean Coleman, you really are becoming a Bostonian when you start referring something that it was called 35 years ago.
Well, just showing that us Philadelphia people can learn, and though we don't do good football this week.
Thank you. So I do have a number of questions about this. I also want to be very respectful of, since I harp on this repeatedly, even during our strategic planning process, that we as a body are a policy-making body. And it's the superintendent and her team that does the implementation, and I want to be very respectful of that difference. And also, thank you, Superintendent, because you are listening as you hear from the community, and you're hearing what's important. And even as you are learning the city and learning the district, and on your listening tour, you're also moving forward on some things that you're hearing right away. And yes, we had expressed concern at the initial list of K-6s and said, boy, this is going to be a quickening trend now, because what happens to the K-5? So I'm trying to be very respectful of what you're doing. I do want to ask a couple questions just to understand it, but again, this is your role to do operational, and I'm respectful of that difference. On the K-6 expansions in East Boston and the 6 schools that are going to move to K-6, how many students are we talking about now? So in those 6 schools, how many are rising 6th graders?
I'll just need one moment to pull that up. But
Okay.
if you,
And as you pull that up, Mr. Kudo, I'm wondering where those students are going now. I'm assuming it's the Edwards, I'm assuming it's Humana. Where else are they going now for 6th grade?
the 3 primary places that they are going are the Edwards, the Humana, and then the McKay as well.
Because McKay is K-8.
McKay is K-8, and they have a slightly larger 6th grade, in addition to the fact that the 6th grade class size is larger than the 5th grade class size, so that opens up space for kids to move in.
Okay.
We anticipate that the McKay, being a very popular K-8,
will continue to fill in that 6th grade. We are working with the Umana and the Edwards around the impact of decreased 6th grade enrollment on their overall programming.
So in the Edwards, you're stopping it completely. And how many are in the Edwards now in 6th grade? And then not just obviously calling it, getting students from East Boston, but from other neighborhoods as well. So how many are in the 6 schools that you expand to 6, and then how many are entering 6 in Umana, and how many are entering 6 at the Edwards?
I'm going to pull up the enrollment data and have the answer for you in a minute. I'm just going to need a little bit of time.
Okay, so as you're looking at that, I'll go back to you, Ms. Roberts. Are there any changes in the McCormick incoming 6th grade? Are there any changes in the McCormick incoming 6th grade?
So the McCormick will not be taking a 6th grade for next school year.
McCormick will be like the Edwards, so it will be a 7 and
It'll
8.
be 7th and 8th
Dever is
grade.
expanding to 6th grade next year.
And the Dever is expanded to 6, so they'll, okay.
They're gonna
Along
work
with the
together
other
on a
4
design.
feeders
So
that we
there's-
mentioned.
Is along with the other 4 feeders. So that is actually changing the McCormick, even as we delay a year in merging them with DCLA.
Yeah.
Right, so McCormick next year will just be 7th and 8th?
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, so that wasn't actually on this sheet. And flipping to the Edwards, so to follow up on what Ms. Robinson was saying, so right now it's 6, 7, 8. Next year will just be 7 and 8 in the school year 2021.
Yes.
And then in 21-22, you're using the word here, close. I would encourage you to maybe just think of a slightly different way to phrase it, because, and correct me if I'm wrong with my understanding, the Edwards as a school program will close, but the building is not closing. I mean, we have such demand there, it's gonna be repurposed to a new grade configuration. It's gonna be something with the Harvard Kent, or with the Warren Prescott, or a standalone. I mean, there's so much demand there, so I just wanna be careful in language, because we have so many people in this city get focused on the word of, we're closing a school. We're gonna be repurposing the grade configuration at the Edwards building.
Yes.
Is that
Yes.
correct to
Yes.
say?
Correct.
That is
Most
correct.
likely after a full year of renovation, not more, but
Yep,
we're
which it-
looking at the condition of all of our middle schools right now to get ahead of what we would have to do in the event that the school program closes, and then making good decisions on what to do with the building after that.
By the way, do we still have that small alt-ed program in the EDCO? Is it, right, so we need to find space for them. But I
Correct.
just want to be careful with the language here, because people tend to focus, getting back to pithy, people focus on, oh, you're closing a school. Well, that's going to be immediately another school building in BPS with just a different grade configuration. But we will have to think about what happens to the rising, what will end up be rising 8th graders at that point.
But that's getting ahead of ourselves a little bit with the announcements that we're going to be making for the high schools in that area. So there may not be those rising 8th graders if we accelerate those 7 through 12.
Gotcha. Okay. Mr. Cooter, I know I have you doing some math, but I also want to get back to something Ms. Roberts said, which is, and I am concerned about this, and I'm sure others are as well, about what happens to the budgets with particularly the Edwards, but also Umana, when they're, and the McCormick, making sure we have a sustainable, that we basically take them out of weighted student funding formula and treat them, I assume this is where you're going, but are you gonna be treating them as, you know, separate, similar to some other schools we have that we take out of weighted student funding? Are we gonna truly have a sustainable budget for them?
That, for the Edwards and the McCormick, that is almost exactly what we will end up doing. As with some of the other schools that are non-weighted student funding, we will work with them to make sure they have the right capacity.
Yep.
So there will be a reduction in core teaching staff at those schools, because you just don't have as many teachers with the grade, but we will ensure the programming and the student experience stays as intact as we can. For the Umana, there's the 6th grade, there's a number of things happening with dual language rolling up for them in 6th grade. And that there's a different transition happening for them to a new model, and also the school is going to continue to operate as a K-8 for many years. So the idea of sustaining their program, it has to be more like a soft landing, where we think about the transition and we ease the transition, but they have to eventually get to a sustainable model that will work within weighted student funding. So the UMANA the treatment will be different, but it is going to be very hands-on. For all of the 6th grades, and I'll need to follow up on your data request. I can provide that information. I apologize for not having it ready in terms of the numbers of 6th graders. For each of the K-6s, one of our theories around this in the K-6 is that not only will we retain students in our schools in 6th grade, but we will start to see a decrease in students leaving in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade as they try and find landing places before, right? We see this in all of our K-5s, that attrition pattern that happens.
Yep.
And
Every
we
school
see the
leader tells
experience.
you that.
And it's different than what we see in our K-8s. And so what we anticipate is that next year, now that the schools have a 6th grade, 3rd grade families are less likely to leave. 4th grade families will be less likely to leave. 5th grade families will be less likely to leave. So all of those grades will have increased enrollment, and therefore sustainability won't be required because the schools will be, healthier because this configuration will make them more competitive. Yeah, that's our theory, knock on wood. Definitely.
Right. That, exactly. The superintendent said we still have to solve the 7 to 12 piece because parents are going to be looking ahead and saying, where are we going? Oh, now you're taking middle schools off the table. Well, do I believe that these high schools are going to be good options for my child?
That's right.
But I know that's the next piece of
It's
the puzzle.
coming.
I understand.
So this is the hard piece for me, Member
chomping
O'Neill,
at the
is
bit.
just because this is what I hear from as I go around. Everybody wants to know the plan, and honestly, I'm trekking as fast as I can to get these answers to not only you all but the whole community. And we see there was already a host of decisions that had already been made, and so we are adding just a few schools to that. Because we hope we can accelerate in this area based on their capacity and based on what we think we've heard from a whole community coming together around a decision. I mean, it was pretty remarkable that the whole community was saying this. It wasn't just one school cheerleading for their school. Yeah, in East Boston and Charlestown as well. And so now we're going to go out, we're going to start these conversations with communities and see, can we move a whole community around these recommendations? And so that's kind of been my theory of action, is how do we get communities, engaging and making recommendations, and then I'm bringing those recommendations to you all. It's just easier that way.
Well,
But the thing that I think is more complicated in some of these secondary decisions is the way that we've done sub-separate, the way that we've done our EL programming, and that there's been less choices for our families around that and less intentionality around the pathways for those specialized programmings. And we want to make sure that we're able to fix that, and that's going to take a little bit more time, over the next several months to unpack and design so that, it's more assured for families.
Well, I understand that, and I know you're chomping at the bit on a bunch of things. I do say, as much as we hated losing him overseeing the alternative ed schools, putting Mr. Welsh in charge of the program, I mean, he is extremely, as we all know, is very well respected in the East Boston and the Charlestown community. So making that shuffle is, it builds trust when you have asked him to be the point person on that for those communities who are willing to probably give us the benefit of the doubt that it's going to happen. Impact on enrollment, any impact on enrollment on Jackson Man? I want to make sure there has been a stated suspicion from that community that we are intentionally trying to slow down on enrollments there. I want to make sure that that in fact is not the case, even as we talk about potentially delaying this for a year.
There was, so in the normal course of our student assignment and enrollment, when we look at schools and the assignment of, and the choice for those schools, if there are schools that are under-enrolled and students have not been assigned yet, we think about potentially contracting capacity. So in the case of, let's say, a first grade class, if they're anticipated to have 3 first grade classes in that school, and after the assignment rounds we look and they really only have a class and a half and they're not going to get to that 3rd class, we start to look to adjust the school at that point.
And so there was nothing different about the Jackson Man in this year that we wouldn't normally do. K-1 demand for the Jackson Man was much lower this year, or has been low. And there was a point over the summer where there wasn't enough students to open a second class in terms of demand. All of the students from the wait list were offered a class, offered a seat at the Jackson Man. The take-up rate for that was not particularly high. So I think the origin of that were people feeling like they were on the wait list but not getting in, and the school sitting there, teachers sitting there not understanding that why the kids hadn't been assigned yet. We were working with the school leader, and this was not us intentionally trying to shrink the school down.
Could it also have been that parents had been told publicly that the building was, closing at the end of the year and that they were going to be moving elsewhere?
I definitely think that there is an effect where there's uncertainty with any school and its effect on school choice. I think this is part of honestly, this is one of the things that the superintendent has come in and just said, you can't just leave schools hanging out there without information. It is a call to action that she's put towards all of us is giving clarity.
That's diplomatic.
Yeah. Could you see the wheels spin? I'm trying not to be the
pick the right
shortest
words
permanent
to say.
CFO. And so I think that's part of what we're trying to do. And I think this is, anytime we create uncertainty or anytime there is uncertainty at the school community, what you see is teachers and families pulling back. I mean, the worst example of this, the most stark example of this since I've been around, was the Rogers Middle School in Hyde Park. The last year that was open, they went through $1 million enrollment decline. Staff, the experienced staff, the committed staff were looking, and it really became a problem. And we didn't have a plan to address it. And I think part of what we're doing in both you're going to see this in an approach to budget, and we're showing it now with the 6th grade sustainability, is we're going to make a commitment to ensuring a quality program for these schools. We're going to fund that quality during this transition point to make sure that this is not it's going to get better, trust us, that they're going to have the program that they need in 6th grade, and then we're going to let enrollment come and fill it. And then we're going to have a guarantee to the middle schools, you are not going to have a change in what you're offered academically or social emotionally or extracurricularly, that was a hard word for me to say, at your school. We're going to fund it now, and then we're going to go through this transition so that these transitions are not paid for by the existing students and staff. And that's again, her call to action, and that's what we're trying for, because we do see that sort of, families see the uncertainty. And I'm a parent. I see it. I wouldn't make that choice.
I know I'm preaching to the choir, but this is kind of going on what Ms. Robinson was saying. We cannot treat any students as numbers and, okay, well, you're a part of a moving class and we'll have, right? This is their only 7th grade. Right. This is their only 8th grade. And I know I'm preaching to the choir when I say this, but I think it's important to say it, that we always have to make sure we have that awareness and that they're getting the exact same experience that they're entitled to in 7th grade. Even as we're, shifting grade configurations at a school. So, and I'm glad to look forward to how that comes across in this year's budget.
The key is getting to a better one, especially for our middle schoolers. This has been like the most troubling thing for me as a middle school educator for most of my life, is this transition at the time that it's like the worst time to have a transition for middle schoolers. And so I'm anxious to get these decisions on the table, get this rolling, and get this phase done, so that we can begin to build these programs for our kids, and rigorous, great, well-rounded programs for them that parents are going to be proud to send their children to, and children are going to have fun going to.
Superintendent, we actually did have that conversation when you were sitting there interviewing with us, right? And
you
so,
did. And I talked about middle schools.
And we did very intentionally say that it is a special mindset to be able to teach those 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And God bless the folks who do it.
Yep. Amen.
Lived through those years as a stepfather, so I get it. But And as we talked about when you were there, it is not about the grade configuration, whether those 7th and 8th graders are part of a high school or whether they're part of a K-8, it's having particular programs for them. And that was one of the things that we were interested in, that you did have that expertise. You did oversee the middle schools in Memphis in particular. And you pointed out to us the difference in program versus configuration. So very sensitive to that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Vice Chair.
Thank you. So thanks for all your work. I can't even imagine how many hours you've spent on this. And thank you for saying about the being clear with schools and transparent, because I think that's, it's better to know what you know than just be guessing. I just have a question and a couple of comments. My question around the Edwards is, I'm wondering if you've had discussions with the partners at the Edwards, so they know what's happening, and figuring out how, any of the partners can work with some other schools if they don't happen to. So it's not obviously just the students and families, but then the external partners of the school.
City Year is there. City is a perfect example.
We have not restarted with the school community, but that is a good reminder for us, so we will work with the school leader to do that as well.
Great.
Next year, we have that time.
Yep. And I really like that you are bringing the school leaders together. I mean, I'd bring all of them together. I've talked to many that are like, if we can just get in a room, I mean, they know more than any of us sitting at the table what the city looks like, what are the challenges. I think they have a very unique voice, so I would encourage that those conversations keep going. I am concerned, I know you just got here, and I know we can't make rash decisions because they need to be thoughtful, and we need to think about the unintended consequences, but I do worry about, when I look at the proposal, there will be 18 K to 6s, and right now we have 4 6 to 12 grades. And I can't remember how many, 7 to 12 schools. So I just want to say that it's an urgency, that's all. And as we have this urgency, is one thing that I'd really like to see in the high school design is to really include partners at the table. So high school, what makes high school great are all of the experiences you have that are not just in the school building. That is your internship, if you're going off-site to do a service project, hands-on activities, project-based, many of the things that external partners bring and do that BPS cannot do. And so I think just making sure that when we're having this conversation, it's not just like the school day, but what does it look like in the evening? What does it look like on the weekend? And how you actually engage partners like in a very strategic way. I think we have to do that, because part of the reason our families are leaving is because they do not trust our high school and middle school experience. They don't. And unless we're going to change the student experience, all of this reconfiguration is not going to matter, and we're going to be having a conversation in 5 years about K to 8s and 9 to 12. So I just really have to say, like, there has to be a much broader, larger conversation that again includes partnerships, strategic, what does the community look like, how does the community own it, what are the other pieces beyond the school day that will really attract our families and encourage them to stay.
Well, thank you, Vice Chair. I think those are wise words, and I think that really underscores the urgent work that we're doing here. And I think this is I've remarked many times in conversations with folks that this is some of the most important work that this district and this committee can be doing right now, because what we're doing is we're setting conditions for the district and the professional educators within the district to do the good work that they've been trained to do, and to make the most of the resources that we can provide them. But it'll be on us to make sure that at this time of great change, we will continue to be focusing on what are those student outcomes, and making sure, more along the lines of what we've heard from Mr. O'Neill and Ms. Robinson, that we're making sure that there's no one falling through the cracks. There isn't a lost grade. There isn't a lost cohort in a school. And so you know, we want to make sure that as we're, you know, keeping the feet to the fire on our planning group and making sure that this is this type of generational change that we've been waiting for decades, I've said that many times, gets seen through. We don't do it at the expense of our current students. Excuse me. So I want to, you know, just go back to where I've heard a few of our my colleagues remark. I'm really impressed by the work that this core team around Build BPS has been doing. It's not just the three of you. I well know that, and I know the superintendent and a number of your colleagues have been working very hard on this issue, because we were very proud with the work that was done by Interim Superintendent Perill and her team last year. But we had that conversation in May to say that where we have the opportunities to accelerate, we want to take those opportunities, and we want to be responsive where we can be within the bounds of our operational abilities to the areas of the city and the schools that want to go now. So so that's all appreciated, and I know you guys are doing great work, and I don't want to dwell on it because I know we've heard a lot from my colleagues. But I think the question that I'd have is, there's a number of schools that wanted to go next year but can't because we don't have the operational abilities to do so. And I know you've been talking to those communities, Superintendent. That's I think it's been appreciated that you've had the honest conversations where, you know, we hear you, individual schools, but we just can't do it. And I want to know a little bit more about how those conversations have been going, because I think people are likely interested in how the district is managing to manage expectations in a district that is thirsty for change.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Chair, that's the $60,000 question. So we are really working quickly to continue to have conversations with the communities. And so my team, as you know, I'm still going out to communities and still engaging with them as part of this tour. But then we've set up meetings with the East Boston, the Charlestown communities. We're going to be meeting with them and their school leaders. The high school team is meeting. That may become more of a focus group as we look at what we actually can do and how quickly we can expand, especially in the areas that have already gone to K-5 or going to K-6. And so some of those answers will become more clear after the Thanksgiving break, and as we set our strategic direction and you then begin to see the strategies that I'm going to be proposing. And so when you see those strategies I'm going to be proposing, you know, over the next couple of weeks, you're going to see budget aligned to that, timelines and resources, and there's just a little bit more vetting we need to do around the capacity of the actual physical buildings, and some more community engagement that we need to do, like in the Roslindale area and that community. So there's still more engagement there. Here in the Roxbury community happens to have more facility needs than some of the other parts of the city that are needing to be, you know, that are a little bit more complicated because of the age of the buildings. And so I think that, you know, those have to get unpacked, and we have to have that conversation with the Roxbury community as well. So I think it's those kinds of people. Then down in Mattapan, they don't have area actually for like a high school, and so it's like trying to identify space for what would that be like, you know. So it's really all of these different pieces that are coming together and how quickly we can actually move. So that's what we're trying to still evaluate, and it's just taking me a little bit longer, but I've committed to going out and continuing to engage with the community, and I think I've demonstrated that now with over 92 community meetings. So me or my team or the superintendents have been convening some of those. Mr. Consalvo has been convening some of those, as well as my team has been going out and meeting particularly with communities as well. So as much as I'm able to be there, I will, but my team will be there as well to have these conversations. I don't want anything to be a surprise, and I don't want to be making decisions for communities.
And so that summary, I think, probably encapsulates a lot of the conversations you've been having with these schools to date. And so I'm wondering then, has that, you know, going back to a couple of those schools that you've had specific conversations with, that K-5s that wanted to become K-6s next year, but we can't include them for reasons of operations, in the batch for next year. Have they heard that message, and how have they reacted to it?
Yeah, I think they appreciate the honest message. I think they still want their school to go
Of course.
to K-6, right? I mean, I think that that's kind of the tough part is
Yeah.
that they know they can't go next year. I mean, if there's something that changes, I'm one who's like, if there's something that changed, I would bring it to you if I could change it quicker. Like the high schools, I would like to move them quick, but I'm not sure they're ready. I'd like to say, oh yeah, I could build a program in 6 months and get something, but we want it to go well, because the worst thing you do is rush something, and then it doesn't go well, and then you lose all faith in the families, or you're trying to clean up and teachers get frustrated. And so we want to make sure that whatever we do really well the first time, so that we build trust, so that then they'll want to come back and build that confidence.
And to that point, I mean, that's what your approach has been
Yeah.
with the McCormick to date, McCormick and BCLA.
Yeah.
That year delay allows you to take
Exactly.
that deeper dive and be able to plan more strategically and get the academic alignment in place in order to make this successful.
But I do want to manage expectations too. Even when you think you've planned everything just so, sometimes things do get a little messy in the transition. And so I can't say that enough, that sometimes it does get, delayed, or maybe we didn't cross a T and we tried and we thought of everything and we didn't. And so then we'll own that and we'll fix it and we'll move on, and try to mitigate as much as we can with our work plan. So we think we have it all down and we think we're anticipating everything, but I think if we are talking to teachers and we're giving good community engagement, I think it'll be fairly seamless. But
As I've said many times,
Just never
quoting a
know.
former White House chief of staff, poor planning predicts poor results, or poor performance. And I think I've cleaned that up a little bit from what his original statement was. But nevertheless, that's a guiding light for us in making sure that we're trying to plan as much as possible so that we can be prepared when the small
little things.
glitches arise. Then I think we've gone a long way. Vice Chair, you had something to add?
I'm so sorry, but
at
since
all.
you're having this conversation, I just wanted to also add that if we can really think about the way our schools are enrolled, especially for our open enrollment schools, if high schools want to turn into 7 to 12, 6 to 12, I mean, we have to look at how our open enrollment schools are taking our most high-need students. And so I would like to advocate that as we're looking at that we all understand that these are all of our students and that they cannot land in only one school.
Right.
So
That is
as
true.
you're looking at the high school piece, I just want to put that, and I was very much reminded of that as I had my school committee interview this week, and one of the headmasters asked me, so I feel also responsible to bring that back.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And I think, that was,
Yes, thank you so
Yeah,
much.
there won't be 612.
Sorry.
that, I think that's been reflected, that thoughtfulness in the way that we redistribute the diversity of programs that we have in our secondary schools when we do have a change in a school model. We saw that with West Roxbury and Urban Science last year. I believe we saw that in thinking through some of the secondary planning that happened last year with the work groups under interim Superintendent Perot. And so a lot of that creates, we have a lot of those people still here in the organization and want to see that work through. And I think that creates a baseline for us to be able to build off of as we think through how we re-envision secondary in the district. So I know you're going to be meeting in January with the Jackson Man and the Horace Man,
Yep.
beginning in January, excuse me, to start planning there. I did want to ask, and we can have this further discussion, but if you can give an estimate for the folks that are watching, when do you think we'll be in a position to have our next Build BPS update to talk a little bit about what the thinking might be around 7 to 12 and maybe give some more clarity to our elementary schools that are looking forward? And if that's a hot question, I retract it.
Okay, retract it. As soon as I possibly can. We are just trying to make sure that our high school principals and communities are comfortable with that, and we just haven't done all of that due diligence yet. We've had high-level conversations, and I just want to make sure that I don't get the cart in front of the horse again.
Fair. And,
And I'm glad I'm getting my metaphors right, by the way, tonight. That's for Charlene out there.
Burn that bridge when you get to it, right? So, I do want to do a little bit of expectation setting in that regard, though, because we do have a number of very busy periods coming up in our traditional calendar. We're obviously going to be talking about enrollment and managing this change for 18 schools over the next couple of months. We'll roll right into budget. We're going to have a report from DESE coming down soon. We're going to be dropping our strategic plan, and so I would suspect that the next time we talk about Build BPS will be sometime in the spring after we get through the budget. So just to set that expectation, if there's anything else that you can update us on in the meantime, if you have any epiphanies or anything else, we'd be all ears. But nevertheless, for those that are watching at home and following this along, I think that's when we can expect the next big iteration of thinking around this process. So thank you, Mr. Cooter, Ms. Roberts, Mr. Hanlon. And congratulations once again in person, Mr. Cooter, for your anointing as permanent CFO. That comes with a button. I'll have to deliver that later. And we look forward to working with you much more in the future. All right, moving on to public comments. Ms. Sullivan.
Thank you. We have no speakers for public comment.
Very good. Any new business from fellow members? Vice Chair Oliver Davila.
You can call me Ms. Reyes if you want. If only I could be as smart as her. I wanted to just bring something up, and I might be the only person that feels that way. But again, going on my school committee interview, I was asked a question that I honestly did not know the answer to. So we'll see if I'll be back on this committee. But the question was around safety. And so I really realized that I don't really know anything about our safety plans, especially as we're living in the world today. And I wondered if anyone else felt that way, and if there was a way to get a report on how we're actually being proactive. And also, when I talk about the safety, not just like the shooters and all of that, I'm also talking about the ICE piece and how the protocols that we're taking to protect students. So you don't have to answer this question now, but I'm hoping if we can get some.
We will. We can do that, but I just want Mr. Consalvo to talk. We were asked this question about safety and the work that we're doing with the city and the convening that you do with the city.
Sure.
And if you could just briefly answer that for her, and then we'll get you more of a comprehensive report. But I thought the work that Mr. Consalvo is doing in collaboration with the city and BPD is pretty impressive.
Thank you, Superintendent. So just two big pieces that we've been working on in collaboration with both Kim Pelletreau and Jill Cotter and other folks from our team as we look at both safety and social and emotional well-being. We're part of a regular meeting at police headquarters with Commissioner Gross and his team, and it's a meeting of many city agencies that come together to regularly talk about strategic planning around summer violence, around issues when school opens, things of that nature. So we sit on those meetings, and they're very frequently with the commissioner and his command staff and team and other city agencies. And then the city is really making a concerted effort around the opioid crisis and around the work of public safety as it relates to that. So we do actually a daily phone call every morning at 8:30 where all city agencies are on a conference call, and we go around that call to talk about pertinent issues. It's an opportunity for me, for example, to talk about on that daily call any 311 reports that have come in around needles around properties, encampments on our properties. We've got a couple of issues of encampments on our properties and things of that nature. We also do a weekly meeting, and it rotates between City Hall and the bowling building, where we alternate each week where we meet, where all city departments get together to talk about public safety issues related to the opioid crisis. It started as a mass cast meeting, and it's really focused on the issues around mass cast, but a broader circle of area that needs help, and we are working on things like an encampment policy and a policy around the mayor's Mass Cast 2.0, how's that being implemented. The mayor's announcing a task force around MassCast 2.0, and we're going to be having a representation from Boston Public Schools on that. So we're excited that the Boston Public Schools voice will be heard, because we have obviously Orchard Gardens in the epicenter of that crisis, but we have 4 or 5 other schools that are also within that epicenter, and we work very closely on. So I give kudos to City Hall from an intergovernmental relations perspective, and Commissioner Gross for including BPS in those meetings, both at the police headquarters as well as part of the opioid crisis through Chief Martinez and Health and Human Services.
Thank you. That's great. I definitely like to hear that. I'd also like to hear about individually in schools what we're doing, especially when we look at what's happened across the country. And I would like to look at the protocols for any ICE agents that come up, and what's the education happening within our schools, and how does it look like? How does it work? So I'd like to just better understand those 2 things.
All right, thank you, Vice Chair. What I would suggest is that we have a budget update coming up, and if you'll recall, there was a significant investment in safety measures in the schools in the current year's budget. So perhaps the district could spend a few minutes talking about what we did with that investment in a number of our buildings and what we will be doing this year. On the ICE issue, I think we would need to talk to the district about when they might be able to collate that and put that into a presentation for us.
And Mr. Chair, I would just add, on that note, because it's an important point that you brought up, the budget that you approved did double the funding for some of the things like locks on school doors and other security cameras and other things of that nature, so.
Yeah. Yep. Any other new business, folks? Okay, well, hearing none, that concludes our business for this evening. Thank you, Mr. Gonsalvo. The next school committee meeting will take place on Wednesday, December 4th at 6 p.m. I don't know what I will do without you people next Wednesday. If there's nothing further, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Second with Dr. Coleman. Unanimous consent. Good night.